Good evening. We're on the air. Welcome to the April 27th Planning Policy Commission meeting. One thing that you may have seen on the call to order is election of officers, but we are delaying that until June, till all our new members and alternates are present to participate in the vote, to try to give everybody a chance to compete for the higher paying jobs of chairman and vice chairman. First item of business tonight is approval of the minutes from April 13th. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes?
I'd like to make a motion to accept the minutes of April 13th.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Minutes accepted. Now is a break from our normal routine and a very pleasant one. We have a special guest tonight, particularly for the television viewing audience. Our council president would like to make a presentation, or I'm not sure exactly what Stacy's going to do, but she's going to do it well.
Oh, well, I hope so.
Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the commission. I really appreciate the opportunity to have this special spot right before you begin your business on your agenda. You may recall several months ago, October, the commission presented a memo to the City Council, and it had to do with your review of the 2016 Comprehensive Plan amendments. And you had several recommendations and comments back to the Council. And so I realize it's several months later, but I wanted to make sure that I got back to you. We have on behalf of the Council, I have a short memo to you in response. And I would like to read that so that it is short, but I like to read that, and also so the people who are watching and the people who are in the audience can hear it as well. And then I have copies for you. I am writing on behalf of the City Council to thank you for Planning Policy Commission's additional recommendations related to the 2016 Comprehensive Plan amendments. I have attached a copy of your memo to our memo when I hand it to you. Before responding to the substance of your memo, I first thank all of you for your hard work and thoughtful comments. The city and this community, not just the City Council, relies on your dedicated work as a critical part of the decision-making process. Second, and as chair of the Council's Land and Shore Committee this year, I acknowledge the frustration with reviewing the 2016 Comprehensive Plan amendments, as it was lengthy and challenging. The 2016 amendments were adopted by the Council on March 20, 2017. Your memo addressed 3 areas of recommendations. Generally, they are: first, state growth targets, service infrastructure provision and level of service; second, city affordable housing strategy; and C, community sustainability indicators. And the Council thanks you for your recommendations. Particularly, I want to note that the Council was not aware that you were working from aged rate studies. This seemed to be a particular concern of the Commission's. The Council thanks you for pointing this out. It is my understanding that City staff is reviewing all impact and mitigation fee rate studies, ages, and data input needs, and will be making a recommendation later this year to the Council regarding how to prioritize and schedule any fee study updates that are needed. The 2017 budget and work plan includes updates to the parks, traffic, non-motorized impact fees, and the general government cost allocation plan. It may be necessary to incorporate funding and staff time into the 2018 budget and work plan for other updates next year. Also, the Council may consider asking the administration to include an aging schedule in future budgets to ensure the Council is kept current on the need for updates. Most of the other comments and concerns in your memo regarding infrastructure, keeping pace with development, growth targets, sustainability indicators, affordable housing, and more are topics of interest to the Council and included in discussions this year as part of the moratorium. I want to thank you again for your very thoughtful memo. If you have any future questions, please don't hesitate to ask, and we very much appreciate your direct comments back to the Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I get these, everybody, or just, how do you want to get everybody? Trish will scan it and send it to people if you're interested in getting the comments, so you can sit down and read them at your leisure. All right, that said, we're ready to go. With Dave Favor starting a review of the sub-area plan update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Crank your microphone up so that everybody can
Talk
hear you.
louder so you can hear me. Can you hear me now? All right, thanks. So I'm going to kick this off and give a presentation about the Old Town Sub-Area Plan update. We've been working with, I think this is our third meeting with the Planning Policy Commission, and we've enjoyed your feedback and the feedback of the public, and we are here tonight to show you the results of that work as well as have a public hearing. So there's an official, I'm going to talk for a while, and we have a team here to talk, and then we'll turn it over to the public. So we have a series of slides, and bear with me as we get through this. So tonight's goals are to give you a background and overview of the plan and the process, as well as a summary I'll get into in a minute on the electronic survey that we have had out for about the last 3 weeks or so that closed yesterday. And then we'll get into the overall plan format, and then a review of the changes from the April 13th PPC meeting, in which we heard some changes. We've had some work, and we'll go through those itemized things that are in your packet, and we'll try and get through that. And then we'll have question and answer availability for the PPC, and then public comment time. And then we'd like to, if you're willing, have discussion, and if you're up for it, a recommendation to move this plan forward to City Council, if you're comfortable doing so tonight. There's an overview. Here's a reminder about the process that we've been going through. It's been a couple years now. So in 2014, there were several council goals established. Council said we want to turn our attention to Old Town. There had been some focus on Central Issaquah and other areas. So, and then in 2015, an Old Town task force was established, focused much on the commercial area of Old Town, and a report was prepared, and we've talked about that in the past. In 2016, we had 2 public open house outreach events in May and November that I'll summarize in a bit. 2017 is where we're here now. I mentioned the survey. We had a couple more open houses in March that were good attendance. It was good to talk with folks there. And then the schedule asks that if council and PPC are comfortable to review and take action on the plan this year. And then I think, so again, this is an overview policy setting plan, setting the direction. And then in 2018, if the schedule continues, is to amend various development and design standards to implement parts of the plan. So that's a process timeline. So now, before I get into the project overview, there's several slides here about the public outreach and I was going to talk about the electronic survey. Here's a summary of the open houses and the outreach I just mentioned. I guess I'd say it started in May with kind of the general questions, like what do you like, what don't you like, what's your vision for the future? And then in November went to more specific topics. And then with the most recent survey, there's kind of narrowed to two big topics, kind of building character and design. And the second one is traffic, cut through traffic issues in the residential neighborhoods and ideas on that. So the survey, the electronic survey, looked at those issues I just talked about, and here's some results that that are in. So first of all, we received 456 electronic responses, and then in the last week or so, Paper copies were handed out to residents in the immediate residential area right around Sunset Way, and 21 paper responses came back from that handout. One of the topics looked at what is the type of character we would all like to see in the single-family duplex neighborhood. So that's north and south of Sunset Way. The first slide shows, we asked, what's your top 3? And this slide shows that, well, you see it there. So 75% like the single-family, kind of old-fashioned craftsman bungalow home, 55% the 2-story, and then a duplex, again, in a kind of a traditional style at 44%. So there's kind of that preference. And we've heard this in earlier open houses, a preference for more traditional, historic, small-scale character. So what did people not like? You can see kind of low scores for what you see up on the screen there. Kind of the more boxy, larger, modern or contemporary design. So moving on, we asked if we were to consider code changes in the future, not tonight, but in future changes, here were some questions asked. The highest one at the bottom, don't allow several small lots to be consolidated into one, so a person could build larger houses, a house or a duplex. The second one is to consider lowering the building height from 3 down to 2 stories. We've heard that in public comment. And a third one is to increase the minimum green space or pervious surface on the lot. It's currently 50%. Some other questions were asked. So when we look at garages, kind of the old-fashioned historic design, do you want to have tuck the garage behind the house? 36% looked at that. Accessory dwelling units, there's a high preference of support for ADUs or mother-in-law apartments. And do you support duplexes that resemble single-family character of house? Pretty strong preference for that. Another question was, would you support additional density that reflects the same scale as a single family? And a little preference for that. So that's kind of quick on the residential. Moving on to Front Street. In the commercial, what's the vision for the future? These are the top 3 vote getters. The top left is the Issaquah Library. And then the bottom left is the 1 or 2 story traditional Main Street look. What was not enjoyed or supported is the 4 to 5 story standalone or mixed use. Well, I guess they're all labeled mixed use, even the older design on the right. Moving to the third category in building character and design was East Sunset Way, right outside the door. We asked, so what land uses would, and the support talks about increasing or allowing small office and retail type uses. Clearly not a preference for the larger commercial uses on that street. And this is currently a multifamily, allows multifamily with 4,000 square feet of office uses on that street. And then to the visual preference survey of along Sunset Way, a preference for the buildings you see here. The highest vote getter is 44%, but so not a real clear preference. And then the types that are less supported along Sunset Way. And then the second big topic has to do with traffic. And so the way so clearly congestion is a problem in Issaquah. So, yeah, they said yes. We were hoping to get feedback on cut-through traffic, and that's the follow-up question, which asked a series of photos, what do you support? So the traffic circle looks like the clear idea supported here. And then slide E, photo E in the bottom is just a narrow street. So I guess not such support for the narrow street. So that's my quick run through of the survey. And, you know, that's once, it's important, but there's been a lot of other public outreach. So let's just be aware of that as we're talking. I'm going to continue. Are you?
Have at it.
Okay. So now let's launch into the overview of the plan. The plan was initially written and adopted in 1999, so 17 or so years ago, now 18. It was updated in 2009 just to remove the bypass when that was no longer supported. Back in 99, there was a preference to preserve the historic scale and character of both commercial and residential areas. And from what we're hearing through this process, that remains the same. The key issues I've just ran through: front, sunset, single-family neighborhood, building character, traffic, and then a consideration of a boundary change at the north end of the Old Town area that we'll show in a minute. This slide talks about elements, the second bullet, that were overhauled in the plan. We've added a definition section. The crossed out chapters are the actual chapters that exist today. They've been renamed, a little repackaged. We've added an environment chapter and a housing chapter that we'll talk about tonight. And these are highlights of kind of the key topics in each of the chapters. And pretty soon we're going to head off into teamwork here. So we have with each different chapter, like last time, we have other staff here. So Kristen Leeson's right behind me, ready to talk about some chapters, and Kurt Seaman, our transportation manager, is here. As is Trish, always, thank you. All right. So we met April 13th. We had discussion here, and these are highlights of elements you're seeing, the PPC is seeing new tonight that's in your packet. Onto let's see, I think this is so here's I guess one of the first topics, I'll talk about it, the boundary map change. So through the discussion, we've looked at Old Town, and up at the north end is a kind of a transition in character from the historic traditional towards what's up at Gilman Boulevard. On the right of that red hatch marked area is the Staples, former Staples store, and on the left side is Confluence Park. So in our discussion, it seemed like a preference or a thought that area is more within the character of the Central Issaquah plan, and so the proposal is to shift it to that place. We had discussion of, well, where should Confluence Park go? I guess it should go everywhere, but the current plan cuts it in half, so we had to pick in or out, and we picked out. But I don't know. I think either way, it's still Confluence Park. It's very important to Old Town, Central Issaquah, and everywhere. That's the boundary map adjustment to consider.
I've got a couple of questions. Should I hold off until you're done with your presentation, or would you like me to start now?
I think it'd be best to hold off if you can remember them.
Good. Yes.
Okay. All right. The introduction chapter, so I'll talk briefly. The introduction chapter is in your packet, covers these topics, kind of just, again, giving an overview. This is a 20-year plan. It's a subset of the comprehensive plan of development of the whole city. And like I said earlier, sets the framework for future code amendments if the city chooses to, and other actions to implement the plan. And now we're ready to launch into the Old Town Community chapter. I'll turn it over to Kristen.
So whatever is highlighted or whatever is in black was there last time. Whatever is in red is a change this time. And you see the vision for the Old Town community is quite a bit longer than it was, seeming a bit generic. You know, we want Central to be pedestrian. We want this to be pedestrian. We want everything to be safe. So we expanded on it a bit just to focus a bit more on Old Town and its historic integrity. And this is weird. Daily services and how easily walkable it already is. Another one of the things that we tried to do in our changes this time, a comment came up that there was a lot of redundancy, so we've tried to eliminate a lot of that. These are pretty simple, changed it to Old Town, added weather protected, because that helps to make it a more 24/7 environment if people are protected from the rain that we have around here. D, so you see down at the bottom, policy A5 is crossed out. Part of that is because it's sense of place, so we wanted to get rid of redundancy. However, we still wanted to note that we want to use architectural and landscape elements to mark transitions and entrances to and within Old Town. So we just merged that into D right above it. Again, redundancy. In A4, street wall didn't sound good to some people, so we just took that out. And then B1 was deleted because of redundancy with those things in the mobility and connectivity element. So goal C, so when we did the survey, we just didn't know how this was going to turn out as far as architectural went or scale. We didn't know what people were thinking. Turns out that people kind of want to see, first, initially the goal focused on Old Town as a whole, but we have a housing section that talks about the character of housing. So we decided to focus this one solely on the Cultural Business District, or the CBD, and Sunset Neighborhood, which is what we're calling it right now, which is East Sunset Way. So that's what the goal did. Policy C1 focuses on the CBD and talks about considering standards that still allow 4 feet, can actually go above 4 feet now, but still allow 4 feet, still allow the building step back or the wedding cake to help preserve views. Don't pay quite as much attention to the impervious surface, but focus a lot on the greenery or the landscaping on walls to help soften it so it doesn't feel quite so urban. So then C2 now focuses on Sunset Way. And people are actually, we heard that they want to reduce the building heights a little bit, down to three stories. I almost said 3 feet, down to 3 stories. And actually don't allow much commercial along that street. So we've written this to reflect that. It would still allow some, but not big commercial, maybe small commercial. Parking, this section also focuses on parking. And we talked last time about establishing maximum parking requirements, which is something that we did in Central Issaquah. The task force wanted to adopt codes more like the Central Issaquah, so they asked us to perhaps lessen minimum parking requirements. And the reason that the task force looked to do this is because our parking requirements now sometimes prohibit properties from redeveloping because they're a bit excessive or just undoable and not feasible. So that's a possibility. However, as it says in the last part of this, we would definitely need to provide sufficient parking somewhere else. And the council has tasked us with coming up with a plan by the end of '28 to figure out where additional parking can go before these things would happen. So we talked about the different neighborhoods in here. We talked about the Cultural Business District, the Sunset neighborhood, the small-scale residential neighborhoods, multifamily. In this map, because we talk about them in the policies, this map is just there to help identify those. And that has been added since last time. And now if Kurt's ready, I'm going to hand it over to Kurt.
How do you just escape? Would it be in the
website.
Oh, is that the easiest place to get? Why doesn't it just
Do
come
the
up?
E. Go to
Oh.
the E. There you go. And then view all. View all.
I should just have you do it.
Yeah. And then there you go.
Oh, more details. There
That's
it is.
okay.
That one?
BBC. Yep. And then you can. There you go. Down there.
Talk amongst yourselves.
And there you go. There you go.
There you go. Here it comes. Wait, what page? 22?
It's page 22.
Ta-da!
There.
And we're off.
Okay. little confusion here, but I'm Kurt Seaman. I'm the transportation manager here in Issaquah. We're going to, instead of, going to switch you from the PowerPoint, just because it seemed like there was a couple things missing that I noticed in the PowerPoint. So we're going to go through things in the actual document you have. And I'm not going to read through everything, but I do want to talk to you at a high level about what we've done and then just go through and hit the highlights here. So as Dave mentioned, I feel like we had lots of great input from the commission and the public last time that really helped us be hopefully more clear on these policies. And so couple of principles that we applied here generally is that less is more, and so we were pretty aggressive in our editing, I think, here, as you'll see, but in no case I feel that we've lost any of the content of what's in here. So you need to be sure to let us know if you feel that's not the case, but we think we've got everything that we've had in here originally, but in far less words, and we tried to say things as simply and clearly and concisely as possible, and to not repeat ourselves, which there seemed to be a lot of repetition in the earlier version. So with that said, the vision is essentially, so we'll go through this is the strike-through version, so you can see what was there and what was what's been changed. So the vision's essentially the same. There's now three goals in the plan. So the first is this idea of a policy that emphasizes connectivity. So you can see in our discussion, better connectivity in all modes within Old Town is really the key. And so we haven't. So in the spirit of repetition, we've struck through the first policy because it just talks about multimodal connectivity. But in policy, which is now policy A1, specifically talk about developing a transportation system that improves connectivity for all modes. So there's a sentence on what sidewalks should be and how they should be built. Same is true for bicycles. We talk about the importance of bus stops for transit, always looking to provide as much on-street parking as possible, and always looking to connect gaps in our system that enhance the completeness of getting around in Old Town. So again, I hope you'll find that everything here in the strike-through portions, we haven't lost anything, and we've really simplified and tried to put all of the ideas into this of connectivity for all the modes into this first policy A1. So that's that. And then policy A2 we talked about a gateway to Old Town, and this came up when we were working on East Sunset as well. So we have a policy in there that we should look to enhance the entrance at East Sunset, so that becomes more of a gateway to mark the entrance to Old Town. So I said I wasn't going to read that, but that's basically what it says there. And then policy A3 goes to this the importance of implementing all the great work that was done for the downtown streetscape plan. So the idea is that good work would be implemented into projects in Old Town. So so that's the policy. That are the policies that support goal A. So I would propose to maybe just go through all the rest of my section and then be happy to answer any questions. So again, everything that was in Goal A remains in Goal A in concept. It's just hopefully said in far less words. It's a little hard to see that with all of the text and all the strike-throughs, but I think if we accepted the strike-throughs, you'd see a much cleaner, simpler version of getting everything done we want here for multimodal connectivity. So that's goal A. So goal B is all about traffic and impacts from traffic to the residential neighborhoods and the businesses as well in Old Town. So we all know, just driving over here this evening, it was reinforced once again how much traffic congestion even here at 6 o'clock at night, and how that traffic degrades the neighborhoods and the quality of life, and both for residents and businesses in this part of town. So we've the policies address that issue on two levels. One is to develop and implement traffic calming strategies, and we've listed a variety of tools, which Dave showed you some pictures of, so turn restrictions, traffic circles, landscape barriers, and so forth. And you'll see we say, and other measures as appropriate. So any or all, we talk about a traffic calming toolbox, and so these are typically the types of tools we have that we know helps with traffic calming. So but it's important to note that we're not limiting ourselves just to these type of improvements. And then, so that's what we're committing to do in Old Town, is to implement a traffic calming program. And then equally important is we know that much of the traffic that's impacting us here is not Issaquah traffic, and so it's equally important to continue to work with all of our partner agencies to look at ways that we can improve the regional corridor's ability to carry regional traffic, which is where regional traffic should be, not on our local streets. So those are the two policies that address traffic impacts in Old Town. And then now it gets a little bit messier here, but hopefully simpler in the end. So goal C talked about increasing the number of trips made by pedestrians and bicyclists in Old Town. And so we've changed that just slightly to, I think, more clearly say what we want to say here, which is we want a balanced transportation system that integrates all the modes, peds, bikes, transit, and the street plan, so that supports multimodal access and circulation, which is consistent, I think, with what we talked about in Goal A. So it's this idea of a balanced transportation system. No one's legislating single occupancy vehicles off the road, but we know that we need to balance all modes of getting around to have a successful transportation system. So that's the goal, that's the discussion about this. And then the policies focus, there's about 7 policies, I think, altogether. We've rather than going through separating them into different goals, we've combined them all into this multimodal goal, and then we've gone into non-motorized policies and how we would support and expand our non-motorized network, which is typically peds and bikes. And so I won't read those to you, but again, same concept, same ideas, hopefully said in a few fewer policies and fewer words. So the non-motorized elements are in policies 1, 2, and 3, and then transit, on how to better support transit, are discussed in policies C4, C5, and C6. And again, I'm happy to discuss, I'm not trying to push you through these, I'm happy to discuss any or all of these in more detail, but I also, to respect everyone's time, won't read all these to you because you have them all in your packet. And then the third sort of major element in this goal C is on how we might be able to expand ride sharing and what that could look like, both with commute trip reduction, those types of policies. And then we know that especially in Old Town, the Issaquah School District has a big impact. So we've specifically mentioned Issaquah School District as a high value group to work with to help reduce traffic impacts in Old Town. So again, you see that goal E is is struck through. But again, we believe that all of the ideas in Goal E have been rolled into, actually D and E have been replaced by a more robust and complete Goal C. So now that I have you maybe totally confused, I'll stop talking. And do we want to answer questions now, or we're going to keep going? Okay.
Keep going.
We'll keep going, and
Almost there.
but I'm not going. I'll still be here.
Okay. And then I'll go back to the PowerPoint. Escape. Escape. That didn't work. There? So we've got two chapters. I'll talk about environment and economic vitality. There's just a couple changes to that. In the environment chapter, policy A1 is a combination of A1 and A2 where, oh yeah, here. Thank you. There's the whole thing. Stormwater is the issue. We've been talking about this, so there's a new code that the city must comply with, which requires, if feasible, stormwater must infiltrate into the soil of the site. And so this is reflecting that. It's reflecting, but the stormwater code does give an option where there's a special zoning district, such as the Old Town Subarea plan, to, in the middle of this discussion, to say if there's a conflict between the stormwater requirements and the vision of developing, according to our vision of development design standards, then we have the choice to say the vision of the development standards can prevail over the requirement for the infiltration of stormwater on site. So to put that in some layperson's terms, so the proposal here is just in the CBD zone, primarily the Front Street area. The vision there is primarily to have buildings right out to the sidewalk, zero lot line, right next to each other on the sides and in the rear. The stormwater LID requirement, low impact stormwater development requirement, could require like a rain garden or a grassy area to infiltrate the water on the site. So if we wanted to build up to the property lines, but at the same time need a rain garden or a biofiltration swale, those two are in conflict. So the proposal here is just not for all of Old Town, because we have that choice to say for all of Old Town, but just for the CBD area, is to later adopt a code that enables the city to choose this option. That's what that's all about. This next policy we discussed last week, or 2 weeks ago, it was a discussion about non-conforming codes that come from an old plan.
David, can you
Yeah.
go back?
Okay.
Because I'm a little confused based on what I've got on my,
Okay, I wondered about that.
because, I mean, you got what I have on my staff report.
Is different than this?
Isn't that?
Okay, thank you I'll clarify. So down, does the mouse work? Right
For
here.
example, placeholder, you've got it crossed out here, but it's still listed.
Yeah, let me,
Breaking news.
Since your
Breaking news.
packet was sent.
Okay.
I should have started with that.
Should have started out.
I should
you
have
know,
started. Breaking news.
Breaking news, okay.
This is
So
what
we
I
had a
hear.
placeholder, and the placeholder is proposed to be replaced with what you see there.
Okay,
Okay? Yeah, all right.
thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you. Sorry about that. This is old news. This next slide is old news. We talked about that last time. The non-conforming discussion, this is outdated code or policy language. We have the comprehensive plan and existing code has more up-to-date discussion of non-conforming. So like Kurt was saying, instead of repeating that in this plan, we'll just let other plans talk about non-conforming policies. Moving on to economic vitality chapter. At last commission meeting, there was a request to add the Issaquah Arts Commission as one of the key groups, and that is there. A4 is stricken to get rid of redundancy, and that policy has moved into the connectivity chapter. And again, B1 is redundant. Policy now B2 addresses the discussion we had at the last meeting about these cell tower, the new cell technology coming online, and finding that balance between concealing these new infrastructure with potential aesthetic negative impacts to the character of the neighborhood. So that's proposed language. See what you think of that. And again, some redundant policies are removed. And more. And then we move on to the housing chapter that Kristen's going to talk about, and then we're almost done here.
I'm back. All right. So, again, with the survey, we found out that it wasn't just the scale, and it wasn't, it's not that you could do, that people were okay with modern as long as it was a small scale. People said, we just want traditional, and we want it to be small. So that's where we started to head with the housing element here. So as that map that I showed you talked about the small scale residential neighborhoods, which are north and south of East Sunset Way. So that's where this is primarily focused. The two sections I'm going to talk about. So that's what the goal does. The first policy talks about ensuring that new and redevelopment is constructed in the same traditional style and scale as the existing small-scale Old Town neighborhoods or residential neighborhoods. A correction that I need to make that came up last time, I think John may have brought it up. We talked about allowing and encouraging cottage housing within Old Town. We threw in small scale too, but there probably needs to be a little more elaboration on what cottage housing is. So we will continue with that. We had that discussion last time. And then thirdly, it's a new policy, provide architectural standards that ensure duplexes are constructed to look like single-family properties, and consider reducing the height from 3 stories down to 2 stories. Currently, 3 stories are allowed. And again, use the traditional materials. Based on the survey, people would, 87% of people would like to continue seeing accessory dwelling units or mother-in-law units there. They help support homeowner maintenance and affordability. And B3, B4, it doesn't show up here, but B3, B4, and B5, we combined those a little bit. There was a lot of redundancy. But with B5, put it into B3 and just said work with organizations such as King County in their King County Consortium Housing Repair Program and help educate low to moderate income homeowners of programs to help people preserve their existing housing. And then C did not change at all. Goal C didn't change at all. It focuses primarily on multifamily and ensuring that there are amenities there, that we work with the multifamily homeowners to do transportation demand programs to help, inform them about carpooling and other options besides having a car, which helps with the cost of not having a car. So that's what C does. There were no changes to that one. So if you have any questions, it's in the packet and we can talk about it, but I didn't want to bring it up here. Okay. I guess I can do next steps. So tonight we have the public hearing, possibly a PPC recommendation. May 8th would go to council work session. May 15th, it gets referred to the Land and Shore Committee, which would happen on June 1st and likely again in July. And then council action, it did say June, but now it's probably going to be pushed out till July. We'll see. All right.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes. Any council members or commission members have any questions of the staff before we open up for public comments?
Got a lot of questions.
Yeah, I've got about a dozen too. So going through the presentation like this, it might be helpful for us to start from the beginning and have everybody kind of go section by section. Maybe, unless you would, Chair, would rather have every council person go in turn.
Okay. That's,
How would you like to?
yes, section by section.
I'm going to start with the very beginning. I think that you guys had included the abridgment of Old Town without the E and was passed by council as part of the the facing? No. So on page 11 of my packet out of 49, or page 1 of 39, we have Old Town with an E 2 different times, and then throughout most of the document, there's no E.
When we refer to the plan that was adopted in 99 and 2009, it's an established adopted plan with an E. So we still call it that, but when we're talking about the new plan or the new, whatever's new, we try to remember to take the E off, but the established plan, we still consider it having the E, because that's what it was in 2009.
And
Does
So if
that
we-
mean it's been decided that there is no E?
It has not been decided. That's still
what
up
we're-
for discussion.
Yeah, that's what we're proposing, though. That's what we heard from most folks, that they would rather get rid of the E. So
And
that's what
I
we're
know
rec-
you had mentioned that you had heard that from the Economic Vitality Commission that was formed for Old Town, but
The
I don't
task
remember
force,
seeing
right.
anything from actual residents. Was there also support from the community about dropping the E? I haven't seen
Right.
that either, so I
Was that a
wanted,
question at the open houses?
I think a lot of residents would feel that way, and so
Sure,
since
you're
I saw
welcome
that
to-
discrepancy,
Yeah,
I
right.
wanted to see where we were falling within that, if that was something that was being decided tonight, if that was being postponed.
It's up for recommendation. The whole thing is up for recommendation. If you guys want to keep the E, that can be part of your recommendation, absolutely.
Okay.
Do we make a motion for that?
At the very end, when you
The
make
very
your
Very end,
things,
yeah.
you
Let's
can.
just try to get through these sections, not beat a dead horse too much if we can get through them. So let's go to section, the first one.
Follow through on the slideshow, or is that? Yeah, okay.
They've got questions that we want to ask.
I think
So I
my
think it's community would be the first one.
My first question, too, is actually about, so we're being asked to look at 2 different considerations, and I would ask that we actually split them tonight. Right now, we're supposed to be voting on this jointly, both the proposed boundary change as well as the updated elements. And so I would ask that we actually call 2 different votes on them, and not do them together. If I may propose to the chair that we actually abridge these and put them, again, still in tonight, but we separate them out, because right now I feel like they're 2 separate issues, rather than lumping them into one.
I'm not sure I understand what the value of that is.
So I was surprised that we've seen a lot of information from staff going through this policy plan, but we haven't seen much about the boundary change. I know, again, it was recommended by the task force, but it was also put to us that the former Staples, most likely brewery that'll be coming in, is able to do it regardless of where it falls. When I am in the area, going up to Gilman, I'm not seeing a strong reasoning why we would want to move that area to the central Issaquah, rather than keeping it with the Old Town. I wasn't at the last meeting, but there was comments looking at the map about people saying, we're not sure what's going down on the bottom. At the bottom, we're not quite sure what's going on, we're kind of getting rid of the top, and I see this kind of condensing of Old Town that I think is a little concerning, and I don't think staff has actually addressed how the community felt about this and a lot of the information that we've gotten about feedback. But we did get feedback from residents in previous meetings saying that they were opposed to this. And so I think that staff hasn't actually addressed,
That they're
you're kind of
Just to
assuming that,
clarify, they're opposed to the boundary change?
yeah, there was comments that were on record, I believe 2 meetings ago, where people said were opposed to it. And I haven't seen any information from you guys other than the recommendation from that task force that recommends this.
Okay, because it's been on the docket it was on the docket last year because of the task force, and then it was on the docket in January when we had the public hearing on it again. And I don't recall anyone talking about that they were against the boundary change.
I would have to go back to that meeting. Unfortunately, I don't have
But you're
my
certainly
notes
welcome
on
to
me, but
recommend against it.
I was surprised that we weren't giving more information. I think trying to help understand why staff encouraged us to make this boundary change, other than that recommendation from the task force. I found it concerning.
Okay?
And so I've got questions about the boundary area as well. Aside from superficially being separated by a creek, what other motivations are there to change this boundary
Well, during the task force discussions, their reasoning for wanting to do it was that they feel like Old Town really doesn't start until you get to Dogwood. They said it's just a different character, we don't really get it. That was their reasoning for making that recommendation.
Okay.
But the
As
creek
far as-
really did separate the feeling of where you are before the creek and where you are after the creek.
Like at the Mercantile Building? Yeah.
If I'm going to ask just two questions. One, if we leave the boundary portion so that's part of Old Town, what do you think that would look like? And if we take your recommendation, what would that look like, potentially?
What would it look like? I don't know what you mean. What would it look
When
like?
it's developed or redeveloped, or?
Right, would the vision for that change? I mean, is it zoned differently because it would no longer be part of the Old Town, it would be part of a different area?
'Cause-
So would the style of that change, would the size
Right.
of the buildings
Staples
change?
The Staples property has an entrance. It can connect up to the Gilman Boulevard that ends with Bohm's and the Grange. And so if you kept it in Old Town, you'd have part of your building accessing from Central and part of it accessing from Old Town. And we thought that just would be really a little mixed messages for the property owner, that he's got two faces and two sub-area plans. So we thought this was a way to move it to one that seemed more logical, because we're not going to pull Gilman out of Central and put it in Old Town. So it seemed more logical to take the creek and make that the border between Central and Old Town.
Okay, well, thinking about Bohm's Candy, that would belong in Old Town.
No, that's not on the table at this point. That's
Okay.
already in the vision. It's in the district vision as part of Old Town, as part of that district. You can
Right.
bring that up in
Well,
your
I mean,
motion, but
because
you're kind of.
their proximity is very close, and the Grange also matches Old Town, right? So
You're
you-
welcome to recommend that if that's, this is the first I've heard that anybody would want to move that part of Gilman into Old Town. I mean, it's,
Well, the reason why I'm asking now is because it's being proposed that we move it out of Old Town.
no, just the
move-
just Staples, up to the creek.
Basically, the line of where Gilman and Front Street is, that intersection. So I think maybe what Ron's point is that adjacent communities fit into the concept of Old Town. So to say that that Staples area doesn't really quite fit in, those surrounding areas kind of help blend it. When we talk about Old Town holding a lot of the treasures of Issaquah, Bohm's is listed as one, and though it's not in Old Town, it's adjacent to and helps create that feeling of going into Old Town.
Exactly, yes, thank you. So what I'm trying to understand is, what is the real purpose? Why would we want to move it out of Old Town? I understand that you're saying it's because of the look and feel, but is that really necessary? Because at some point, you're going to have a separation between Old Town and Gilman.
Exactly.
So what's the vision that the city's thinking about for that? I mean, is the buildings going to be very modern looking and all of a
No.
sudden then?
Not that, and remember, nothing happens until it gets redeveloped. The fact that you're in one sub-area or another sub-area doesn't mean you have to change immediately. It's just the future of the area is what we're looking at when we do a sub-area plan. And when you do the boundaries, if you will, you're looking at either natural features or property lines or some other logical place to separate those areas so that you can have a vision on one side and the other. Typically, it's either a right-of-way or a creek or something so that you're not right across the street from something that's just glaringly different. And so when we re-looked at this, and when the task force first re-looked at it, they said, why didn't you use the creek? Because it seems that when you cross the creek and hit the Mercantile Building, not hit it directly, you see it, that's what that feeling, that's where the sign is, welcome to historic Issaquah, that's when you start seeing all that. It's not before then, and so we thought we would make that correction now. If you guys are uncomfortable with that, you can recommend against it.
I'm not uncomfortable, I'm just trying to understand the logic that made the suggestion. It doesn't really go into, in this docket here about the why. Why would we suggest it? So, and that's what I was really trying to find out is there a reason why we would not want to have a Old Town gateway as opposed to changing it to something that's more modern? And then what would those buildings look like? Would those modern
Okay,
buildings
that's
all of a
zoning.
sudden?
That's zoning.
Yeah, but it's still, it would be part of the vision though, right? Because we'd say, we have two visions that are colliding with each other.
Well, if it turns out, let's say, that Staples ends up in Old 10, the vision for Old 10 is it can have, Route 66 kinds of signage, it can have, we're rewriting that right now during the moratorium. So we have a chance with the architectural designs that we're working on as well through the moratorium to revamp that vision a little bit. And that's where that could come in if it's out of Old Town. If it stays in Old Town, then it still has the same zoning of CBD. It can still have 65 feet height. It still has 95%?
85.
85% impervious, the setbacks. I mean, it has all the same things that it has now.
Okay. All right, so I'm done with this one.
I'll just make one comment about the boundary. I mean, I think, I agree with Ron's point in that maybe it just wasn't well explained, the rationale wasn't well explained, but, I mean, I'm on board with the change for the reasons I think, Trish, you laid out. I've never really felt like you hit downtown until you hit Dogwood. I think you mentioned that, Kristen, and the whole concept, we haven't mentioned Confluence Park, but not having it split in half by a boundary makes sense to me. So, previous comments notwithstanding, I haven't seen those from the public, but I mean, I'm on board with the change, for the record.
I want to ask my commissioners a question here. Based on what we're discussing here, let's debate this. If I say that, if I'm comfortable in saying I want to keep it part of Old Town, because I think it would be a great gateway into Old Town, also from an economic standpoint, because now people are coming into Front Street area, and it's kind of almost like a debut, right? Otherwise, it's going to be part of the core, which is a completely different look and feel. And so you're going to have two competing policies covering those land areas. So I kind of think it would be nice to leave it as Old Town. What's feedback?
Yeah, I brought this up
Is-
because I really didn't see how staff presented to us a motivation to why we were shrinking this boundary map. And when there was other comments from the previous meeting about, well, what's going on the bottom, I really foresee a future where pretty soon all we have is Sunset and Front Street encompassing a future Old Town. And I think that this is a unique opportunity to ask staff, you've been really extensive about going over a lot of this document, but yet we haven't spent much time on this. And all I'd heard was that the task force had wanted it, but yet the economic opportunity isn't actually going to evade us if it stays within the boundary that, from what I understand, the brewery is able to do it either way. So I wasn't seeing that anything from staff really showing us why are we shrinking this boundary and trying to, when we talk about how important this really is to the heart of our city, I was a little confused as to the motivations behind why it was important. And so that's why I was saying maybe that was something that we would take separate votes on so that it wasn't a.
We can talk about that. Let's move on with questions so that we can get the commission member questions answered. Then we can move into the public comment. If we discuss this much more, we'll be here all night before the public has a chance to speak.
But that's
Go ahead.
kind of why we're here, is to, that's
We're
why
going to
we're
go through
here.
each section and ask questions. We'll discuss it afterwards as members
Okay,
of the commission,
okay, that's good.
after we hear from the public, because that may change some perspectives as well.
I like that. All right.
We'll move into the Old Town community. If you have questions on that, apparently you want to go through section by section.
My first question was on C2, on the language of consider reducing. I really felt like we should be putting stronger language after such strong community support The consider reducing the building height felt a little soft to me. I know that staff likes to tell us that the teeth is in the code.
Where are you?
I'm on page 29 of 49 or page 19 of 39. And again, that's OTC policy C2 says, and in red, consider reducing the building height on East Sunset Way. And I felt like we'd had pretty strong support from the community and that was kind of weak language. Again, I know that the teeth is in the code, you like to tell us, but I felt like consider reducing was a little soft on this point.
So are you proposing just saying reducing or reduce? Or what are you proposing?
We actually specify something like building heights shall not exceed those of the other buildings alongside of them. If we don't want to put an actual feet, we want to leave that to code. I understand not wanting to put the specifics in, this is our goals, but again, that language of consider reducing I thought was soft.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
Because I have the same comment on page 43. Instead of using consider reducing, because that's really weak, limit. So it would read as, while maintaining the district characters, the street limiting the building height on East Sunset Way for new development and redevelopment to 3 stories. Because if you say consider, then it's, code would have to be written as maybe to be considered, and then we're back to what happens in the CIP where it becomes recommended and then no one does it.
We have comments in this here about, wanting to preserve our view corridors, and I think that height is a big part of that. And so when we have these other values in this document, I would like it to I think it should be reflected throughout. So again, I would be for replacing to limiting instead of saying consider reducing.
Okay.
Anyone else?
So I'm going to make a, let's see.
Okay.
My next question was, again, on that same page, but it's policy 3 of the OTC. And this goes back to this quality materials are used in new and redeveloped projects. You had said that this concept of quality materials, which was not in the friendly definitions that were provided to us, so I realize that this is something that's still being ironed out, but it felt a little innocuous to just be referencing something that isn't concrete. And again, I recognize that staff doesn't have the resources to be able to present to us the whole package at once. So there is this element of trust, but I was a little concerned about this vague quality materials.
In Central Issaquah in the plan, we say such as. We could put some such ases in there. I think we still
If
have
that would
them in
help,
there.
yeah.
If that
would help.
helps.
Yeah.
Can you tell us where you're at? And I can
Yep,
show
so
the
again, that's
folks.
page 19 of 39 or 29 of 49, OTC policy C3. Ensure
Okay.
quality materials are used in new and redeveloped projects to
There,
convey a
thanks.
sense of permanence.
Kristen, what did you propose?
Just saying after quality materials such as,
Such
and then
as.
listing a few examples.
Okay. As long as we don't object because we didn't name every quality material down the road.
And I think that's one of the reasons we leave it out. But if you say such as, or for example.
Well, then, yeah, I
it-
mean, if you don't say anything, then you're essentially making that decision at the planning desk, right? Which,
Right.
I don't know, yeah.
Right.
Other questions in that section?
I just had a comment on the discussion under OTC Goal C, traditional character, et cetera, and then there's the discussion. And I know the discussion is just to provide context, I think, for the policies that follow. It did seem in that particular discussion, sorry, that's page 18 of 39 in the packet. There were a few things that you get into that paragraph that talk about, there's a sentence that starts, new development and redevelopment along East Sunset Way would focus on a mix of office, services, and residential, yet not retail. Things like that that almost seemed like a policy that I didn't see reflected in the policies later, which a separate comment, not sure I would recommend dictating use that much, but that's a separate comment. But, so there's that. And then actually after that, the rest of that paragraph, development of East Sunset Way, small parcels provide for potential negative impacts to abutting single-family neighborhoods, et cetera. I kind of thought those last couple sentences were almost like value judgments that were placed in there that, I mean, I think it probably is a negative impact on those abutting communities, but it seemed kind of weird to have, you know, a value judgment in the document. That's all.
And the last statement there, the following are intended to lead us into the code changes. That's what we were trying to do in the discussion,
Okay.
as you said, to set the context for what we would be doing next. But you're right, it's odd to try to put forward what you're going to try to put into code without setting out a policy that's really clear. We don't want retail on Sunset. So it's, we were trying to
Yeah, no, that makes
have a
sense.
balance. But yeah, that's, you're right. Yeah, I'm not sure what to do there.
Yeah.
I've got a question about the Old Town map. In the legend, it uses the word cultural business neighborhood. Does the word cultural have any significant meaning?
The
Well,
zone
this
is the cultural business district, the CBD, get it? But it's cultural instead of central, like in a lot of other main places. But we didn't want the map to just look like it's a zoning map, so we call it the area, the cultural business area. So
Okay.
it doesn't appear to be a zoning map.
So the reality is cultural is just a word used
Well,
to,
I mean, we have the theater there, you have art stores, you know, there, and classes there, and music stores and theater classes. So it is sort of our cultural part of Issaquah.
right. But I mean, from a map standpoint, it's a marketing term.
No, it's,
No.
well, it's the name of the zone,
Designation, yeah.
is the cultural business
Right.
district.
Okay.
I had a question about page 19 of 39 or 29 of 49, OTC policy D2, which in red, and consider lessening minimum parking requirements. I think we should strike this entire thing. I felt that this idea of maintaining the character while providing sufficient amounts of parking, when we know that council has asked staff to come back with more parking, we know that there's a huge crunch that we're going to have with parking. There were comments about this refacing of Old Town, of being able to allow businesses in front to take away their street parking in front to be able to open up their businesses to the street. So that's another potential way of losing street parking. And as most of us know, literally, it can make a difference. Just those 2-3 spots can make a difference of you hunting all night, being able to have dinner, and turning around and going to another community, or just having that. So this comment of saying, you know, we want to help maintain the character while providing sufficient amounts of parking, we know there's not sufficient amounts of parking. We know staff needs to work on this. So putting in language that says we want to lessen the minimum parking requirements for businesses, though I understand was recommended by the task force, I would be in favor of striking. If anyone else felt strongly about allowing businesses to not provide the amount of parking that we've already set as being a requirement for them to exist.
That, again, that's more of an item to discuss after we hear the public comment. We're into discussing particulars now. What we want to do in this section is to get questions to the staff. So if you have specific questions in regards to something that's here that you don't understand, then we'll get to discussions after we have the public comments.
Nothing more from me on that section.
Any other specific questions on, I know we want to, again, that's my, what you're talking about is more discussion aspects before we would vote on something.
Okay.
So that's what if you have any questions other than that, other than it's pretty clear, in my opinion, we can discuss these items afterwards. So hearing no objection from the council members, I will open it up for public comments.
So you're just going section at a time? Their
we're
questions
skipping
and
it.
then public?
No, it's just
No.
go public, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Ready to go. So if there are members of the public that would
Oh, I
like
forgot to
to
put out the
ask
sheet,
questions or
didn't I?
make comments,
The sign-on sheet.
This is your option. Please go to the microphone and remember,
Do you need them to?
state your name and address.
Can I have the business, the figure 2 map up?
The neighborhood one? Okay, we have to go to the, yeah, sure. Hold on. It's in the packet, not on. Was this way or that way? Guess it's this way.
You can fill it out after, too.
Is this the map?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And the mouse works if you.
Okay. So,
Again, state your name and address, please.
I'm Chris Craven, and I live at 580 Front Street South. And thank you for the time and opportunity to talk tonight. So this is confusing to me. Again, it shows boundaries, but we've only laid out portions of the district, so it leaves a lot to the imagination of what is going on in the rest of the plan. One thing that particularly bothers me is it seems, I assume, I'll try to speak loud, but I assume that green.
Need to stay at the microphone.
Okay, I assume that green section is the area across the street and we're on the small green. So I feel like there's some significant civic properties that aren't even mapped out on this. We have the schools that are in here. We have the community center and the green that connects the community center. And to me, all of that is Old Town. It is. And I'd like to see it depicted as Old Town. The pool is not on here, and it's a significant cultural landmark that is historical as well, I believe. So I think I would like to see more depiction of the entire Old Town District. We talk about gateways, and we've depicted and we've talked in the plan about the Sunset Gateway. And maybe you could help me with the numbers of travelers that come through that gateway. I'm assuming that is pretty equal to the southern gateway that comes into Old Town from our south. And yet, we have not addressed another major gateway into Old Town. For instance, I'll just give reference to an analogy. If somebody comes over to my house or my home, whether they come in the front door or the back door, I have a bench and I have a carpet, and I ask them to take off their shoes, and it sets the tone for how I want my guests to behave in my home. And I think that is similar to how we want our guests to be welcomed and behave in our precious Old Town that is a district, a character, and an arrival place. So in regards to the discussion on the north, I've always envisioned the gateway as being the beautifully landscaped intersection of Gilman and Front. To me, that is, I'm entering part of Old Town or Front Street in downtown Issaquah. I do agree with your statement about addressing regional traffic versus the through traffic. I totally agree with that. I think that is applauded to be in there. Sorry, I had a little note card here to be able to take some notes that I wanted to talk about. The one thing in regards to the boundaries too, and identifying all the uses and all the properties and all the gateways, and we talked about the schools and how we want the traffic to interact with that, how we want the character
of Old Town to support those connections to the school. So I think it's really important to diagram it out because it starts creating some patterns and some priorities and some policies that go forward. We talk about in this Old Town about the acquisition of the Creekside properties, and yet it's not part of the boundary. So here's another either or. If we're talking about acquiring Creekside properties, then maybe it should be included in the boundary, or maybe we shouldn't talk about it as part of the Old Town plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Lindsay Walsh. I'm at 1769 28th Avenue Northeast in the Highlands. I'm just going to go page by page like you guys were.
Maybe.
I think I need to get back to the entryway. So I absolutely agree with the idea of keeping the boundaries as they are. I think when the downtown streetscape plan was recently presented to the city council, they had talked about creating signage at that entry point as kind of a placemaking for ensuring that as people come into the Old Town area, they recognize, okay, I'm entering. We have a great opportunity right at that corner of Front and Gilman to have that signage there, whereas there isn't as much down near the creek, and I think it's very important, as you said, the gateway into that. Let's see. Agree with on C2, the reduce limit versus consider. Agree with the such as for quality materials. For D2, with the lessening of the minimum parking requirements, if we're talking about the ability to redevelop on Sunset and areas like that, we may just consider putting something in there exempting the CBD from lessening parking restrictions and allowing it in some of those other areas, since this encompasses a very large zone, if that was what was intended there. So within the connectivity and mobility goal B, policy B1, this continues to suggest that we use traffic calming such as chicanes and narrow street, even though the community survey disagreed. So we may want to strike those areas. Going into C3, what area is that? Yeah, so connectivity and mobility C3 on page 34 of 49. C3D, requiring weather protection over sidewalks along pedestrian-oriented streets. We may want to suggest that that's just in the CBD area in order to strengthen that recommendation, since obviously we're not going to recommend people on the Sunset housing areas require weather protection, although I very much agree in the CBD area. Also, that should just be integrated into the downtown streetscape plan, since we're moving ahead with that, if possible. Moving on to the next page, in what is now C8, it looks like the word "and" is missing in there. There was a strike through, and that should be corrected. Already talked about defining. Okay, I'm moving on to 44 of 49 in the packet. This is into the housing policy B1. When we're talking about the ADUs, would it be possible, and I don't know whether this belongs in this plan or otherwise, to, if we are recommending ADUs, as obviously the community wanted based on the survey. If there was the ability to require less than the 50% open space on the property in order to encourage that development, which would help with our low-income housing and maintaining the housing prospects, that might be one way to do it. And I think I'm done. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Steve Pereira, 170 Northeast Dogwood Street for about 9.5 years. So I guess just to shout out Commission Member Lewis, I just liked you led it with this seems to have the E removed from a lot of these places. I'm the one of those that had concern with the E being removed. I think even as we're preparing the documents, it should be consistent throughout. And if the E is in the process, then it should be used throughout the process until such time as it gets recommended for removal. So I guess taking these as two different topics, the next was the whether or not we have the gateway and whether or not the change of the boundary. I have concerns with that, and as I expressed last time, one of those concerns was that there's already a lot of traffic that comes from the stables and turns onto Crescent and does a U-turn. And I think you're only increasing the use and likelihood that it's continued to be by changing the boundary and lessening the boundary. You've done nothing to talk about how that's not going to happen to a larger degree now. It puts pressure on residential communities. I know I've heard a lot of talk in the past about people on like Bush and Alder from Sunset. They get a lot of pass-through traffic. We're only going to increase the pass-through traffic if we increase the density or change the boundary from Old Town to something else. I think it also, there's a lot of us that do look at things like Bohm's Candy and the Grange as part of the Old Town, even though it may be out of the out of the central business district or the whatever those terms are. I think I have concerns with moving that because it increases the pressure. We haven't talked about how we're addressing traffic already on Front Street without increasing the density on Front Street by increased zoning. I haven't heard how or if zoning or moving that parcel to the central business district from CBD to the central Issaquah plan allows for increased density or maybe higher density that can be allowed in the central Issaquah plan that would not be allowed today. I know that the planned brewery, which is the current plan, might be looking at it, but you could also look at larger redevelopment of other businesses there, such as I think it's a Thai restaurant now, and I just have concerns with that. I think it also ties in nicely the way it is when you consider the Grange and Bohm's, and that segues around to a dead end where it connects with Dogwood, Northeast Dogwood. So I have some concerns about the changing the boundary. Conceptually it makes sense, but there's still more negatives than are positives. One of the items talked about on the mobility, the bicycle facilities. Facilities to me means more things like where we're going to store our bikes or a Pronto-style bike system. It doesn't talk about the mobility or the actual using bikes on the roads. And I think we need to focus on people riding bikes and pedestrians, not just on facilities, which is too narrow of a scope. So that segues with what are the code that's going to tie in with this. I mean, this is kind of an aspirational statement. It has nothing to do with code. One of the things another thing I heard was that it talks about the stormwater code could be revised so that it requires, instead of requiring rain gardens or drip drainage, that could be reduced or removed to have a lesser standard where we don't require drip drainage. I think that's a problem and concern. I think we're talking about more and more density on Front Street. I have concerns with reducing that density, and I think allowing that would indeed increase the likelihood of higher density and higher building standards in Issaquah. I think another point is that I think we talk about a lot about economic vitality. That's important, but it's not, it needs to have an equal measurement for livability standards. And I think we'd do much better at talking about economic vitality when you have a set number, how much of revenue have you increased, than you do about about livability factors like the small town feeling that we have, that we need to maintain. Next one was under the housing policy A2, the small scale cottage style. One of the things, I guess two things. One is, does that include like the idea of mini housing? And I know I heard that we need to flesh that out more as far as what that means. I would also ask that if you look at having ADUs, you also have requirements for additional parking on the property, not just have more people parking on the street. You haven't talked about how you're going to accommodate the additional traffic that come through ADUs, and that needs to be part of the discussion. Next point, rain coverage. It obviously rains a lot in Washington as it rains tonight. I have concerns with already with people standing, a lot of the businesses on Front Street, a lot of people just stand in the doorways and smoke within 25 feet of the entrance. I think that just moves them from the entryway to out in front of the window to smoke and put their cigarette butts. So I guess for that small town look and feeling, I don't know that we need to have awning coverage for people. That changes the look and style of the feelings of the buildings, I think, on there. Next point was that, as kind of a segue, I know I've heard about the Arts Commission being tied in, and maybe if we're looking at signage changes for the area to tie in with some of the arts commissions for doing those, I think that's a good thing. And lastly, I guess it just talks about, I get the, again, this, one of the things was mentioned was the, again, gets back to code, but it's also the point that Member Lewis referred to, is that I don't get the feeling of consider things isn't strong enough language to me. There needs to be more of, we're only going to allow density at this height, and that's whatever the code says you can build, that's what they're going to be allowed to build. And I haven't heard, I guess I keep hearing that there's a 50-foot density now, and I'm looking like I know I'm not going to get an answer, but it seems like 2 stories is sufficient for me, not higher than 2 standards should be the density or the height requirement. For me, that would include limiting, or should be included, the limit on the elevator shaft, which doesn't have to maintain at current standards, can be above the 50 height threshold limit. And I have concerns with keeping those sight lines from our beautiful scenic area. That's it for me.
Thank you. Jim Brady. Your chance. You can always change your mind. Next person. Andrew Turner.
Hi, my name's Andrew Turner. I live at 260 Northeast Alder Street. It's a gray house with a yellow door right over there. I just wanted to start by thanking the commission and the sub-area team for their service. I know this is a lot of work, and it's easy for sort of folks to take shots on the side and fill out surveys and then not show up, but you all are here, and you all are here, so thank you for that. Second thing I'd say is just some context on our family. We've been here for about 9 years. We have 2 kids. They walk to school every day up to Clark. They'll be going to IMS, and they'll be going to Issaquah High School. And so I come at this from a point of view of sort of the yellow neighborhood, which is we prefer a walking, safe neighborhood. We prefer the small town feel, and yet my wife and I love going out to dinner on Front Street. We like going to Jack's. We love that Levitate is here. We like lots more places like that. For us, it's this great mix of sort of a emerging small town with some sort of more modern amenities. So that's kind of the spirit of my comments. In general, I'm not a huge fan of design standards that would sort of legislate cookie cutter. I think that the hard thing that you all are going to have to do, that I don't have an answer to, is to thread the needle between this notion of old and new seamlessly intertwining. And I think that's hard to do. And in general, I prefer to let individual homeowners, let them make the decision for how they want to design and build their own home. That's what we did. I think ours fits within the neighborhood. You all can be your own judge of that. But I think it's difficult to sort of legislate what homeowners can and cannot do. At the same time, I think it's difficult. I have a difference between individual homeowners and developers. And I think that I would support potentially different design standards for developers. And I think that if you look at the survey results, the things that you've picked, we used to live up on Andrew Street that Mr. Capilouto built. That's a builder way of thinking about this, and our house is the way an individual homeowner thinks of this. Again, you can make your own decision on what you like and what you don't like, but I think that there are potentially different incentives there. And in general, I prefer for small young families like ourselves that need a bigger house to have some more degrees of freedom to, they live here, they kind of know why they're here. It's hard enough to find a house here anyway. You probably aren't going to put up some crazy modern thing. And at the end of the day, hopefully they'd make that decision, but I generally don't support that. I don't know how to put that into policy or code, but that's sort of difficult. Third thing is I applaud all of the things that we put in here about easing traffic and congestion, especially with pass-through. As I mentioned, we walk our kids to school every day, and it's important to us that we continue to be able to do that. We'll be doing that for 8 or 9 years, and it is only going to get worse, as some of the folks have talked about. I have a couple pieces of specific feedback before I get to the E. Housing on HA2 here is on, just give me a second. Page 33 of 49 or 43 of 49. I do think that we need to define small scale. I think that if you think about a community that's going to invite new, diverse population of ages, cultures, and incomes, it needs to accommodate young and growing families like ours. We have 2 kids. Other folks in the neighborhood have 4. I think we need to be careful about how we think about this idea of small versus sort of maybe appropriate. And I think that we have some code recommendations with respect to pervious and impervious and height, but I don't think you can just have a bunch of small cottages. I think that you will not have as much diversity as you might want to with respect to older families and newer, younger families. The second thing is I'd ask us to define in the mobility section. Just give me a second. There's something on page 22 of 39, 32 of 49. It's Connectivity and Mobility Policy A1E. Complete gaps and enhancing existing incomplete connections throughout Old Town. What does that mean? What gaps are incomplete? And what connections need to be connected? This is a red flag for me as a guy that lives in that neighborhood right over there with the opportunity to magically connect a bunch of things, potentially through our walking neighborhood. That statement concerns me. So I'd say to Commissioner Lewis's feedback early on, we need more specific language about where those connections are. Otherwise, it's sort of like, it doesn't really mean much. The last thing, the E. I feel passionately about the E. And Commissioner Lewis, thank you for bringing it up. In old maps of Old Town, there's an E. It's currently has an E. There's been no, as far as I'm aware, public survey on the E. It's Old Town. In the introductory comments, we have a notion of an authentic sense of place, and the authentic sense of place has an E. So leave it. Thanks.
Thank you. Jenny Begum?
No, I'll leave that out, honest, I will. No. Although, Jenny Bingham, 375 Southeast Andrews Street. And I was trying to think of the word I wanted to say, kind of appalled but not surprised that they're still digging with the word Old Town, O-L-D-E versus old. I spoke last Thursday and had looked up the meaning of old and OLD and OLDE, and OLDE means quaint. OLD is kind of like end of life, OLD. I mean, truthfully, okay? I've lived here in Issaquah and Andrews Street since 1969. So I know what OLDE town is. You came down, first of all, Gilman was Highway 10. There was no I-90. So if you went up to Factoria or went up to Overlake or anything and you came down, the only thing you could see coming down into this town is Dairy Gold lights. That's it. That only told you there was a town down here. Old Town started just as you came down the hill, which meant Gilman, okay? Which there was nothing over there until you got to Dairy Gold. Across the street from Dairy Gold, which is now Staples, had a little white house. In the mid-70s, that little white house that sat where Staples is was the first house that is now over at Gilman Village. The far east White House was the very first one. That's Old Town, OLDE, with A and W. The bowling alley used to be back by Bohm's. OLDE Town, which goes clear out to, I'd say, Flintoffs. That wasn't a signature street, never meant to be a signature street, never, and shouldn't be, because we've got a traffic problem. The infrastructure in Issaquah is awful, yet we still just keep adding more homes. We have no plan to add any more streets. Something's got to happen. And the traffic calming was my biggest thing too, is when we passed these surveys out, I know that we've got, what did you say, 90 some back, and then I got some surveys from the city last Friday and walked them. I got some help from actually the Flintoffs people and Dave Kapler, and we did Birch and Alder and Andrews and Bush, because I know a lot of seniors around there, they don't know anything about next door. There's no more paper, no more Issaquah Press. They don't go on the city website to see what's happening around here. So I asked them if I could get these, and I was mad dashing because I got them later than I had anticipated I was going to get them. So I mad dashed, and we got out there on Friday night and delivered them to people. And I understand we got 21 back. That's better than nothing. However, when they went to turn them in over the weekend, I went on Monday and took 2 seniors that asked me to walk them, went down to deliver them to the police station. No, I have to say this because there were people that walked them down over the weekend. So I went down on Monday and said, I need to turn a couple of these in for some people. There was no box at the police station for these people to turn it in. And I was telling all these people, and I had to make a mad dash to tell all these people about this survey. It wasn't like I had a whole month because I didn't have the papers to hand out. I didn't have a whole month to spend and talk with all these seniors. It was boom, 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 and leaving them on doorsteps, talking to as many people as I could. However, I think I would have gotten more than 21 people to turn them in. So my question is, the people that turned them in are mainly online, and they're not going to be as concerned about the cut-through traffic as we people that live here. I would like to see you guys consider talking more to just our people who have the problems with the cut-through traffic and the speeding, and work with us only on this traffic calming. Traffic calming, they've picked the roundabouts. You've already told me that you're not going to do curbing on Andrews, Bush, no curbing. There's no money for curbing, curb and gutter. So if the people come off Sunset Way, come to 4th Avenue, and there's a roundabout here, and they're going down here to get up to 2nd Avenue, they're going to do what they do now and just go right into the gravel and peel out at a high rate of speed. So that isn't going to work. I just want you to do a little more with the people that are affected rather than have a survey for the whole city that don't really care about the traffic calming down here. They care about getting where they want to go. And believe me, it's not anywhere here in Issaquah that they're doing business, period. So I just say, I don't think our city council or our people on Front Street have a right to take and name our town. First of all, then we're gonna have the council wanting to name Issaquah back to Gilman. That's what this place used to be called. So what right do they have, without a vote of the community or anybody, to take OLDE town that they made years ago into OLD? Thank you.
Thank you. Mary?
Thank you. My name is Mary Lynch, and I reside at 2690 Northwest Oakcrest Drive, Issaquah. And I came here tonight. One of the things is I was on the Citizens Task Force for the Central Area Plan, and I was concerned when I saw that the lines were being redrawn. One of the things is, taking the Confluence Park out of the Old Town area. Because if you look at, even though a lot of it's not colored in, there's not a whole lot of parks in the Old Town area, and you've got pretty small lots. And as part of the Citizens Task Force of the Central Area Plan, we basically said that the Central Area Plan should be making its own parks. And so to move it into the Central Area Plan, all of a sudden they have another park that they hadn't planned on, and does that mean that they're not going to create new parks in the Central Area Plan? That's my take on that. I really think it should stay in the Old Town, and at least that side. The other, I'll again talk with the other and the locals as where the other side should be. I also on here would like to see the multimodal trails, not only where the missing links, but where are they now? Because that's part of our culture. It's hiking and biking and trails. So the Rainier Trail really ought to be identified on here. And with it, then the view corridors that we want to keep, because that's part of our culture. And none of that shows up on this map. And when you get south of town, there's some major view corridors and trails that aren't shown on here. I would like to see also, when we're talking about multimodal, and I've mentioned this before, is we need to include motorized chairs. It may be non-motorized paths, but a lot of our people in Issaquah are using motorized chairs. So that needs to be part of our codes and standards, and I really think needs to stand apart when we're designing things. I don't see anything in here that talks about all walk intersections and that going into it, because if we're going to reset codes, that was one of the things that came up in the Front Street as being a big positive from the local group of people that were talking. So that should be talked, I think, in the codes and standards. I also think we need to look at also parking enforcement, and doing what some of the other cities do is having stickers for the residents that get to park, and those that don't have a sticker get tagged if they're there for more than 2 to 3 hours. That ought to be something we're looking at changing policy and codes also, because the downtown area is being used as a park and ride, and it's only going to get worse now with the park and rides in Bellevue being closed. They're not going to be able to get to where they need to go, so they're going to be using our downtown area for park and rides, and our parking was going to be worse. Stormwater. My concern is with now all the trees off of Front Street, we've created our own problem with water. Trees absorb a large percent of the water that comes down. We don't have trees. That's also effective. If you look at any downtown architectural, when they talk about walkability, trees are part of what makes an area walkable. And I was appalled that we allowed the cut down of the trees on the Front Street area, and I think we need to put some of those back. We also need to look at green roofs as part of the central area. We've got an example down on Rainier already with green roofs. So, we need to look at other alternatives and more green ways of handling our water. And I think rain gardens is something on some of these other areas, is work with the neighbors in Old Town to come up with some rain gardens. As far as the economic, again, Issaquah School District was not a partner. They're part of our economic vitality. They also, we need to show them on here because their property is totally underutilized. We can have adult classes, we can have music courses. There's all sorts of things that we could be doing to raise money and economic vitality. Co-housing, we need to consider tiny homes and the ability to do mobile homes. That's going to be a code change because a lot of the tiny homes are mobile. Co-housing should also be included with the cottages, and I've put that, and I didn't see it anyplace. I've said it every time I've come to one of these meetings. I said we need to talk about the green project and aging in place, and I don't see that in any of the policies. Also, the other thing I think we need to do is in the streetscapes, we showed all this art walk, but we didn't look at it again from a walkability. And a lot of, in the streetscapes plans, a lot of those metal walls covered ways to get into the parking and walking paths. So, you know, that should be a priority, is identifying where our walking paths are and showing them on this map, and also our walkability. The other thing, just very briefly, is we need to look at all of our underlying codes. Last week it was divulged from staff after a question was asked about streets. Our sidewalk codes is based on 1964 codes, which were in 1970 ruled unconstitutional. As we're going back and rewriting our policies, rewriting our codes, I would hope someplace in here we say that all of our underlying codes need to be reviewed for, are they current and are they the best practices? Because they were laughing at the meeting, the fact that they were based on 1964 codes. And I think that's appalling. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the last individual signed up. Anybody else? Mel, you want to make some comments?
My name's Mel Morgan. I'm on the Development Commission, so I think you have my address. I just wanted to suggest, with regard to the comment about lessening the parking requirements, if I understand correctly, the parking requirements right now would be the same for the city except for the central area, if I have that right, which would be such as for restaurants, I think it's 1 parking stall per 100 square feet. And for apartments, unless they're studios, it's 2 parking stalls per unit, even if it's a 1-bedroom unit. So I would just suggest, before taking out that statement about lessening, take a look at what the actual parking requirements are, because it may be reasonable to bring some of those down for the, especially the cultural business district. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public? Hi, Connie. You were hiding back under the corner, didn't see you.
I was trying to work. Okay, Connie Marsh, live up on Squawk. So I've been trying not to pay attention to this because it makes me sort of crazy. So I was just reading it and gasping periodically. I agree, considering is not enough. The map is mainly blank, and not only is it missing creek sides, there's no creek, so it doesn't show, it doesn't even give you an idea of what you might be talking about. And so I think last time I spoke about the whole south end just having no particular vision or no concept for the future. And so I think this needs to go back, not be approved, and ask for a more overarching view of this that gives you enough detail so that you can actually understand what this might look like in 20 years or 30 years. Right now, it's sort of just like dinking around with the code a little bit. So, for example, for me, I go down Front Street South and I want to get across the street, and I don't want the traffic stuck there. I want it to be my town again, right? I want it to be 25 miles an hour. I want retail on either side, and I want us, the community, to be able to cross the street all the way down to Squawk Valley Park. And this is the beginning of that transition. Right now, we've just sort of said, you know, there's residential, there's little commercial down there, and that's good enough. I don't think that is good enough. I think we have to plan for what we want the future to be, because Old Town should not just languish, saying, yeah, you know, little houses, little commercial. What would be the most vital, smashing Old Town you could imagine. And that does not necessarily, in my mind, mean that we all have to have the same architecture. I agree with this gentleman here. It's a fine balance between having a little new flair and a little old flair, but not having impacts on the next door neighbor so they're looking at nasty blank walls every time they get up, for example. So I think there's a lot more work to be done in a holistic and general information manner. Now my anal retentive side comes out. I've been reading this for years. Axial views must be protected from public areas. You know what? I don't even know what that means. So I looked up axial views, and what I get is anatomy. So let's put down what we want. We want to enjoy our mountains and our green hillsides around us from many and varied viewpoints around Old Town. That's what we want. And it isn't necessarily just from public places and roads. Like, I'm going to stand in the middle of the road and say, well, look, I can see Tiger from here. Bam, I'm dead. All right. Policy A4 says, enhance wayfinding by creating visual interest and activity in the public realm, contributing to positive pedestrian experience. I don't know what that means. I don't know how getting visual interest and activity in the public realm helps you with wayfinding. And so then I went back and I looked for good directive language on wayfinding, and I couldn't really find anything that would help describe how you figure out where you're getting around town. Right now, you're screening off all of the parking, so okay, how do you know where you're going to park? Now you've hidden it, for example, right? Where do you go for your public parking? How do you find the little cut around the corner parking behind Jack's? Right? These are the things I want to know about wayfinding. If I'm a stranger in town and I'm stuck in my traffic and I wanted to pull off, where would I go and what would I do? And that I didn't see in there. I also didn't agree with, having read some of the surveys, that this idea that Sunset didn't want small retail. What I read of the survey results is they did want small retail and small commercial. They did not want large retail. And so this idea that we must protect just one front street from encroaching retail, I think, stultifies, if that's even a word, Old Town for the future. And I don't think we really want to go there. We want to make it awesome retail so everybody gets more customers, right? There's no particular maintenance policies for the landscaping, sidewalks, and streets, which, as Mary said, we found out the other day that really, those people who own those properties aren't required to maintain their sidewalks or their landscaping. And we have an entire central Issaquah plan and Old Town that are assuming something that is absolutely not true. So now we need some policy language. Cut-through traffic is not defined. I don't know what it means anymore. Is cut-through regional traffic cutting through Front Street? Is that what you're trying to stop? Or are you trying to stop the cut-through traffic that is going from Issaquah to Issaquah? It's just using the old neighborhoods to do so. And so without knowing what you're talking about for cut-through traffic, I'm for getting rid of regional traffic, but I'm not sure that that was the intent, because that is also cut-through traffic. And there's economic vitality policy C3 that talks about some sort of streamlined permitting system when everybody adheres to the standards proposed. Well, we don't really have the standards, and I don't entirely understand what the mechanism is for that. Do you have a planned action ordinance for this, like we do for the central Issaquah plan that binds and allows for that shortcutting of permitting through code? Looks like old language, so maybe it's been there a long time and I've just never read it before, but I think somebody needs to tell you what the mechanism for that is. And that's all I could come up with while I was listening. Thanks.
Thank you, Connie. Anybody else? Hearing none and seeing no hands raised and nobody jumping up, we'll close public comments and go into discussion by the commission members.
Do we want to let staff address any of the awesome comments we had from the public? I just want to say thank you for everybody coming out and voicing their thoughts on what we've been talking about. Does staff want to address anything that was said before we get going?
Only the things you would like us to address.
Anything?
I mean, if there's something specific,
Okay.
we're happy
If you
to
have,
address.
if
whatever you'd
any of
like
the
to.
public comments raises questions or comments or discussion by members of commission, you can ask the staff to answer that to your satisfaction.
I would like to start off the discussion with voicing my concerns about the way this is currently written, and I don't think we would be ready for a vote tonight on this. I think this is half-baked, and I think we need to go back through it and discuss
Say
it.
again? The whole thing, you aren't ready for a vote tonight?
I don't think any part of this agenda is ready for a vote tonight. I think we need to go back and actually discuss this and maybe make some revisions together on this.
Okay.
Crickets.
We've got a chance to discuss stuff
Okay.
yet tonight, so.
I'd like to start with a question about housing. There doesn't seem to be addressing any of this issue of, right now, I think there's specifically in the document, there's language about the 30% and above, but there's no comments about people who fall within the 0 to 30%, and addressing the large homeless population that we have. While I don't want to assume that we take that into Old Town, I think it's something that we've all seen has affected Old Town, and I'm curious why staff left out of this new section, which is very valuable. We need to have a housing section in this, why we didn't address any of that segment of the population.
Do you want me to address it, or do you? The part of the sub-area plan is to address things that are specific only to Old Town or more Old Town than other places. And since housing, affordable housing, homeless is part of the whole city's issues, and we're doing a housing strategy right now, we left that issue to be talked about entirely for the whole city and not pieces of it in different sub-areas, because we wanted to treat it as an issue for the whole city and not just for one part of the city. That was why we chose to do it that way.
Okay.
Same with the tree canopy, same with sustainability, those kinds that are citywide policies or citywide happenings. We try to leave those in the comprehensive plan to be overarching the whole city and just do the specifics in the sub-area plans.
I was glad to see the addition of the housing, but I felt like we were leaving out a chunk of it, and I was curious why.
There is the preservation in there of the existing housing stock, because some of our best affordable housing is in Old Town just because it's older. So
Right,
that's
so
in
we
there.
specifically addressed that, and I was curious
Right,
why
'cause
we
if there's
didn't
a-
expand and start talking about
Yeah, if there's a
the
place
whole
to take
picture.
advantage of preservation of existing housing, it's in Old Town, so.
Yeah.
Just a quick question based on public comment. Could Trish or Dave or somebody just speak to, there's a lot of talk about the map and the blank pieces of the map. Is there a reason for that, or
Yeah, so
the
the map,
practicality of it?
the map was intended to be a reference for the neighborhoods
Right.
that we were talking about in the policies. We did not put in a non-motorized map to show where all the existing and proposed routes are, because we have a non-motorized map in our comprehensive plan. And part of the issue that we have found is that we have a non-motorized map in our central Issaquah plan, and we have one in the comprehensive plan, but they're inconsistent. And even though we have tried to make those consistent, it doesn't always happen. And so right now we have inconsistent maps, and we would like to avoid that. So that's why we didn't show existing and proposed. This was just intended to be a neighborhood reference map. We put it up there initially without the public properties, but then there were big white spaces. The public properties are the ones in green. There were big white spaces just there, and like, well, that looks kind of weird. Why we leave that out? So we showed the public properties, and yes, we probably could have shown them all. It wasn't intended to show where all of the public facilities or municipal buildings are. It was just intended to show why those white spaces, keep the white spaces out. Anything else?
Right. And the other piece is, in the existing plan, there are the neighborhoods that are regulated by the standards, the CBD standards and the Sunset, and the area, the multifamily area adjacent to it. So there's a similar map in the existing plan that just has those areas highlighted and not anything else. because the lower part, which is the school and some of the multifamily on Front Street, they aren't regulated any differently than their land use code says. And so we didn't want folks to think they were getting regulated differently because they're on the map. But maybe to make it less confusing, we could put them on the map, but just state that there's no additional regulations for those areas being proposed in the plan, but they're still in Old Town. That'd be one way to do it.
And clearly, there was some confusion about this map, so if you guys have any direction, let us know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my thought on that is, I understand it's a reference map, and I get the point of it. It does leave open the question, like, well, what about everything else? And I understand what you just said, Trish, about it's regulated all the same. So I think maybe just filling it in would answer that question. I do, there was a comment about the gateways and what about the southern gateway. I do think there's an opportunity there to at least, and I'm not suggesting that we change the way it looks or what the vision is for that southern gateway, but maybe just acknowledging that there is yet another way into Old Town and mentioning that, because we talk about the other two ways into Old Town. So I would support addition of that.
Right. And the reason we talked about the gateway from Sunset is we know that there's a Sunset design project going on right now. So we thought, wouldn't it be great to put in a gateway idea before we actually start that? Because we know that there's something coming soon. So we could certainly mention the other ones, even though there's not a project imminent.
Yeah. That's all.
I think in general, the concern about the whole southern half of the Old Town described area is really valid and something that needs to be explored or at least defined more in this plan. And a map like this seems like something that should be like one of the first pages of the plan to me, that is like, here's the area we're talking about, and here's how each of those separate colored areas is being treated, and here's what our vision for that. Whether it's just existing and saying preserve existing and defining that, at least acknowledging that it's in the area and that it needs to be incorporated into this plan for that area, I think is really critical.
So I've got some topics I'd like to discuss here. Looking at the housing policy, A1, I have some language I'd like to add to it. Leaving the language as it is, and then after, it says Old Town neighborhoods, so this is again H policy, A1, add front yard setbacks and landscaping, dedicated entry and walkways, main entry location, garage placement, and prominence. The reason why I'm thinking about including that into the vision is because they're not codes. What you're doing is you're saying, this is the look and style that we're looking for in Old Town. If we do not include it, and you go through the new developments in Old Town today, you will notice that there are front doors on the sides of houses instead of in the front, so they're not welcoming. You have garages right out in front as a main entry point, and that's not necessarily an Old Town look either. That's more of a urban look, right? So maybe putting this type of language into policy will help us define more accurate codes to enforce it.
I had similar comments when I read this. To me, if we want to describe how we want to establish these things, and for A1, it's kind of curious to say, like, shouldn't this be a part of the policy to help guide the code? I recognize that this is not the code. This is not where we're putting in exact building requirements. But the more, we talked about wanting to condense some of this language. To me, this is an area where we want to expel a little bit more, because this is the place that we have to be able to guide future discussions of what that code is. So I'm for trying to actually define this language here in the housing policy in A1 and in A2, because when we start talking about what is small scale, I think it's hard to start saying, well, are this the size of the homes? What kind of, the difference between a tiny home, a cottage. These are all different types of living and different things that people can do on a lot to be able to accommodate a variety of lifestyles and of economic means. And without defining those terms and just saying something like small scale, it's not really known as far as, does that mean that homes can't exceed a size? Does that mean that it starts to get a little fuzzy? So I think that we need to have a better defining of terms, both for A1 and A2. And A3, when it says consider, again, I don't like that word. Consider the limiting new residential development on A3. I felt like that language, again, was soft, using that word consider. Whereas I felt the community had really backed wanting strong language about that, and that's specifically on that A3, so.
You want to change similar to the earlier discussion, the traditional materials? You want to change that to define what traditional materials are as well?
And there's a
We
whole
do
part in the
In
discussion.
the discussion, we tried to put all the the gabled roofs, what traditional, and so would Ron's sentences be better up there? Because that's where we're trying to put context of what it means to be traditional and what traditional materials
wood,
are.
stone, brick.
What the architecture is, it's gabled roof types of things. I mean, not everybody has to have a gabled roof, but we're giving suggestions so they're not in the policy to handcuff us, but they're in the discussion to give context of what we mean when we say they need to be the same traditional style and scale because of the context. But if you'd mentioned porches, and I didn't catch all the list of things that you mentioned.
Yeah, I'll read it again. Front yards, well, should I just read the whole thing so everybody?
Well, I'm just curious if that list would be better up with the other items that were, when we were doing, for examples, up there. Do you want the list to be longer? Is that what you're saying?
I don't necessarily think it needs to be longer. I just think that the policy needs to be more focused. So, for instance, when we say establish architectural standards that help ensure new and development is constructed in the same traditional style and scale as existing small residential neighborhoods, front yard setbacks and landscaping, dedicated entryway, dedicated entry walkways and main entry locations, garage placement and prominence needs to be traditional, right? So non-traditional is putting the front door on the side of the house.
Right, I get what you're saying, Ron. See the paragraph above that?
The discussion paragraph.
Where we say, important historic elements such as two-story houses, gabled roofs, traditional materials of wood, stone, brick, and multi-paned windows. What we're trying to do there is establish a context of what it means when we say in the policies, the architectural and the traditional elements. It worries me as someone that's going to try to enforce it if you only have it in one policy, and then 3 policies later you talk about traditional or you talk about elements, and it's not there, but it's in this one. We're trying to put them in places so that they can all refer back to that.
Okay, so you're recommending putting it up in the main paragraph?
Right, that if you want a list of things, we're happy to put a bigger list if you would like, but we're worried about scattering the list because then when we want it to say something, it'll be in another spot.
Sure.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. And then,
So in that same area, when we have policy for A2, allow and encourage small-scale cottage housing within Old Town, I feel like we need to
We have to
better
further
We agree
define.
that that needs to be better defined, yeah.
in A3,
Sorry, what is the best way to move forward on that? I mean, what is the kind of action plan in general on how to define that? Because everyone's got different ideas on what that
I
means,
think we
right?
talked last time, because it was your comment, that they have to truly be not big cottages, but, and you had, like with the the
Right, they have
gardens and
central, they
the-
have common yards in the center, and parking is off-site, and they're not 2,200 square feet, they're
Right.
closer, you know,
Well, and there was a
1,500 square
great
feet.
public comment that there should be variety, right?
Right.
There should be small, there should be medium, there should be large there. So incorporating that and kind of maybe when we throw out those terms, maybe there's a way to, in the policy, just vague, kind of briefly touch on small, medium, large scale, and then talk about some kind of appropriate mix, I guess.
Because cottage living has that communal aspect where some shared resources exist, but also having tiny homes is a very small footprint. We're talking about a few hundred square feet,
yeah,
but it's
tiny
all
homes are
enclosed on that,
yeah,
And
tiny
so when we
homes are
talk about
completely
encouraging
different.
ADUs and being able to really have a more affordable housing, we need to have all these different modes of being rather than just one traditional style of house. We're saying we want to encourage that. So I don't know whether it's putting it in the definitions, but breaking apart these things that we want to encourage, because we talk about, ADUs, we talk about all these different things, but yet we don't actually define these different styles that we want to accept into the community, and defining what those different ones are.
Yeah, we would like to define that and put that in the, but that was something that John added last time, and we just didn't have the time to turn it around in a week to get it all in there.
We able to move on? Any other questions? Okay.
Yeah.
Policy A3, oh, no, that was good timing, actually. I'm glad you interrupted. Consider limiting, again, I think that's really a weak language. I'd like to remove consider and put in limit.
Just change consider limiting just to limit.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I would be for that.
And there it's talking about 2 stories with traditional materials as well. Now, this actually brings in another question here. Looking at the original Old Town standards, the original Old Town design standards for it covered Front Street and Sunset. I'm wondering if we should be adopting those in our discussion of Old Town, because there's a lot of parallelisms when it comes to the residential units.
Adopting them how? They're already adopted.
They're adopted, and then we're amending those right after this in 2018.
They exist today.
Right.
Right,
cover
but what I'm
since
saying
the-
is actually, because we're talking about Old Town right now in our policy,
Right?
why don't we take those Old Town design standards, because those are not codes,
Yes,
Yes, they are code.
They're the teeth.
but it's a hybrid document.
It's
It's not really
No.
code, it's,
It is.
that's code?
It's
Yes.
code.
I did not know that.
It's a
Okay.
beautiful thing, too. It's got pictures. It says encourage, discourage. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's why I didn't think it was
It
code.
even has color palette. It has a color palette.
They
That's how
made
beautiful
code
it
interesting.
is.
Wow, I
Yeah.
did not know that. Okay, I stand corrected. Because that goes into discussing 2-story units with gabled.
Correct, those are the teeth.
So we're not looking at 3-story houses, it's 2-story houses. And now we put that in towards the Old Town, and then that's keeping it consistent throughout, not just on Front Street and Sunset.
No, well, they have different zones, so the regulations are different for Front and different for Sunset.
And one of the discussions that we've had is it currently does Sunset, the cultural business district, and multifamily, other multifamily districts. So what we're talking about adding to the standards would be the small-scale residential that you see in yellow up there. Because it currently does not talk about that.
Right, okay. I need to go back and do more research.
Since we're in housing right now, I had a question about housing policy C1, where it says that pedestrian amenities that serve as a draw to the commercial areas of Old Town. I wanted to know, how do you decide what is a draw to the community? I was a little confused about this language. Are we trying to say that we're encouraging more economic development, one store begets encouraging going to more stores. I wasn't quite sure of this
it's like-
language of as a draw to.
Right, it's like the festival street that was proposed in the streetscape
Yeah.
that doesn't change anything, it just makes it more inviting, more pedestrian friendly. You could have little plaza parties there. It just takes what we have and makes it more accessible, more able to participate in things, and just makes it more viable.
And then ideally too, you don't build, an apartment building lobby is not a draw to Front Street. But a building that has mixed use on the bottom, or an art studio next to the lobby or something, that is a draw to a community.
Because it makes the walking, the windows more interesting than, walking by a lobby or a dentist office or something that's, you can't see through the windows. It's just not as fun to walk to the next place.
Yeah, I think the community is strongly supportive of this, retail below, live above concept, but I just didn't feel like the language on here, again, that serves as a draw to the commercial areas. I didn't understand how it seemed a little flowery to me. I think if we want to talk about how we want to really encourage the mixed use, I think it needs to be defined a little differently. For some reason, the language of serving as a draw to the commercial areas didn't feel like it was trying to achieve what you were saying, which is that emphasis on saying we want to encourage mixed use, we want to have, we want to not encourage a certain type of thing, like a lobby to a building, we want to instead encourage this. I thought that language then could be stronger if that's what the point of that statement was for C1.
Sort of a related comment there, and maybe something that kind of runs through for me, and I think some folks in the public said it as well. Sticking with that policy C1, just as an example, earlier, I think in economic vitality, I talked about, in the discussion, it said, we want East Sunset to be a certain way except for retail, and we talked about that a minute ago. And so then this would sort of seem to be an internal conflict with that earlier statement, unless here we're just talking about the cultural business district. And so maybe just sort of throughout, there are a couple of things, limited parking and, exceptions for LID, and maybe in this case, how we want mixed use to look. If we're just talking about the cultural business district, just stating that in some cases or qualifying it. Because here it looks like we're trying to apply that everywhere, and maybe we're not.
Good point.
I've got two other suggestions I want to add to this plan, but we are going up to 9 o'clock. Do we want to carry this conversation forward? The next planning? Do as a discussion?
Your next meeting that you could discuss this is in June.
In June.
Unless we call a special meeting somehow in May, but you're already booked up for May. I believe you're already booked up, I don't have a packet. I think you're booked up in June too, but we'd fit it in somehow.
What's your thoughts? I think it needs to be further discussed. I think we need to polish it off. This is definitely not ready to go to city council.
I disagree. I think it is ready to go to city council. So
Okay.
with some pointed amendments or suggestions. Again, this is a broad view. It doesn't have to be
Oh, there it is.
Sure. Well,
the nits, but
let me add my two comments and then for discussion and
Let's keep
feedback on it.
discussing and see if we
we
can.
can talk,
if
we also
can
have to
achieve
talk about
something.
whether you want to separate the old town or the,
Yeah, and we might,
Boundary.
apparently we might want to make a statement about the E as well, I think.
well, I agree on the,
Yeah.
So, two comments. I don't see anywhere in this policy, and the Old Town, maybe it doesn't belong in the Old Town policy, but I think Old Town it's important that we have something that is for Old Town. A pea patch and a flower garden. A pea patch for gardening.
yeah.
So a community space that allows people to come in. I got your email for that, but that
It's
was
in
more for under the parks in general, right?
Well,
But-
it's part of the green necklace.
But that means it could go almost anywhere. And I think Old Town's unique because it's got some very excellent real estate that would
It's in the green necklace policy of Old Town.
Oh, so there is
So it's in there.
place for a pea patch in the Old Town policy.
I sent it to you, it's in there.
Okay, I didn't read it as that. I thought,
Okay.
when I read it as green necklace, I didn't realize it was actually associated to Old Town.
Right, it's continuing it from Central to Old Town to contain all the trails and parks, and pea patches are a perfect idea for
Okay,
Old Town
okay,
as well.
I didn't realize
I think
that.
it's in
Thank
there.
you
It's in,
for that clarification. And the
It does,
other
'cause
option,
I Googled
and this probably belongs, again, may belong in the plan as opposed to the Old Town plan. But when it comes to transit shelters, in terms of covered shelters, I had some suggestions that we should be building shelters, bus shelters, that reflect Old Town, reflect Issaquah in general. But
I agree. I actually have this comment on the C&M C3, and that's regarding the language for the bike, the bike kind of centers that we want to be using. And I was saying we wanted to have language that basically says how they're physically integrated into the space. How we integrate that into Old Town, I think, is really important. We need to have language about where we're actually plopping our bike share into the city, these things, and that how they're designed should be specifically reflected of that code of Old Town, rather than kind of having the traditional Seattle's bike share, which is kind of this steel aluminum look that kind of gets parked down wherever there is concrete. To me, that we don't really know what our bike share program is going to look like, but I think that when it does, it really ought to look adorable. It really ought to fit the feel of the community. So this is similar to your point about bus stops, is that they should reflect the feeling of Old Town. And so I think we should have language where we talk about these things to be able to say that they need to be placed in a thoughtful way, that they need to be designed to aesthetically adhere to the values of the community.
Hey, Trish, I've got some pictures I'd like to show. Can I load it into onto the
Pictures for
presentation?
what exactly?
I have some pictures of bus stops that I'd like to show our,
Okay, and you know we're not in charge of bus stops, Metro and,
right, but we have a say in what we use for bus stops, if we
Right.
want to pay for them, or we can also use other methods. I just don't want to, well, I want us
it
to be able
seems
to
very
discuss it.
detailed for the topic tonight.
But, you
But
know,
it's not really detailed. It's important because if we don't include shelters in our vision, we're going to get what Metro is going to give us. And I want to be very
Right.
clear.
I agree with Joy that we
Yeah.
should put the language in there to be consistent with the design and the character. I'm not sure we want to put specific pictures in there.
No, and I'm not saying pictures. What I'm saying, I want to use pictures to illustrate the importance of it in terms of how to word the policy so that it's focused, not general. Because if we say we want bus stops to be, to reflect Issaquah, and that could be a generic Metro structured bus stop with pictures of fish on it,
Right.
as opposed to a bus stop that is architecturally designed to meet and embrace the values of Old Town and
Right.
Issaquah.
And I can see that right now the design standards have pictures like that, not of transit stations, but they have encouraged pictures that we want things to look like this, this, and this, and not this, this, and this. And it sounds like those would be perfect for the standards, where you're actually using pieces of the picture to say, this is what we want, no matter if the applicant is Metro or if it's a developer. And then, but there's not a lot of pictures in the plan other than sort of those overarching sort of visionary ones that like are environment.
So if we want to put together a policy for bus shelters, where would you recommend that we do that?
would agree with the way Joy phrased it, that you would design it in how did I have it written? Design in the character of Old Town. And the bike share, she said, the bike share that fits the character of Old Town. I mean, we would poof it up a little bit, but that it's the same, just like the houses, just like the commercial, that everything should have that feeling that it's all together and not like, you know, totally out of place. Like you're saying that you're worried that all of a sudden we're going to get a real shiny, modern spacecraft kind of a transit shelter. Is that what that kind of a thing you're worried about, that it's like totally not supposed to be here?
Yes,
Is
because
that
I
what
did
you're
some
getting at?
research on bus shelters.
That's probably what Metro will do. They'll design one that,
I looked at a lot of their designer bus shelters, and they're great for downtown Seattle, but they are not good for Issaquah.
So I think what we should do is we should say that we appreciate Ron doing this research, because I think it's really important to the community, and if you could share that with city staff, and while those pictures may not be included in this document, that they are something that we'd like staff to use as a referential point of when we start to say, this is actually something we want to develop money. We want to put some money aside into putting a bus stop, regardless if Metro wants to give us those funds, and this is a reference point of other things. So those pictures can go where we also already have design pictures and references, but they don't necessarily live in this document. So we want to.
Yeah, these pictures were just for our discussion, so that we would be able to put together maybe policy language.
Sounds like for the most part, we're all on board with that concept.
I think so.
Yeah.
But I want to say thank you for going to that effort and being able to help staff with that, since we don't have a current repertoire of photos in our resources, basically, maybe we
Right.
can say, even though they're not going to be a part of the document.
Right.
It was a lot easier to find ones I think would be inappropriate than appropriate.
That's always the way.
This is talking about kind of more the superficial, how Old Town looks. I have a question about this document, and that's that the C&M policy E2 was crossed out. All this connectivity and mobility, goal E, was crossed out, except for one line. I'm hoping that just is my outdated page 25 of 39 or 35 of 49. So all this is redded, and then it crossed out, except for the last line of continue to develop strong partnerships with the regional transit agencies that serve Issaquah. And I think
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble finding the
page 25 of 39 or 35 of 49, and it's the crossed out mobility goal E, C&M policy E2. And again, I have it all read out except for the last line of
It's in
continue.
C5.
It's been moved to C5.
It's
so
moved
it
up in
was just-
C5. I'm
Okay, so
sorry.
that's what I
It's
was
just a
hoping,
mistake.
because I was like, I feel like we've already stated
Yeah.
these concepts, it's already integrated, so I wanted that red line to.
it's
Right,
moved over.
thanks
Yeah,
for that. We were
I
having
wanted-
a little eye crosserosis with all
Sorry,
the
I know it's getting
crossing
late,
out.
but again, I didn't want to
No,
have
I
that.
missed that totally. Thanks for pointing that out.
Since my document still showed that as being a part of it. So I really appreciated Commissioner Morgan's comments about the parking, and so that's something that I want to address with you guys. We have, let me see, I can give you actual stuff. So we have OTC policy D2 on page 29 of 49, where we want to encourage the lessening of the minimum parking requirements. But then we have other places where we say, for instance, in policy A1, section D, always provide as much on-street parking as feasible.
Right, on-street parking is public. What we're talking about, the minimum and the maximum, is for an applicant coming in and building something. That the private parking would have a minimum and a maximum, but public parking, we would want to provide public parking wherever, however, everywhere that we can provide it.
So is there a way for us to then talk about, so consider lessening the minimum parking requirements? So it sounds like you're talking about, for housing versus for businesses, you want to encourage lessening what is already the required amount of parking for a business that would come in.
Right.
You want to say you don't need as much parking, but yet, so then in terms, then that would mean spill out onto the street, but we have an issue with parking. The council has asked you guys to find more parking, so
More public parking.
more public, right, so do you see how I'm seeing this issue of,
Right.
we want to encourage development, so we're going to lessen some of the requirements of parking, yet we know we have a parking problem, we have a mandate from council to find more parking. So by having businesses have to provide less parking to their customers, that spill out then affects public parking. which then spills out across. So I guess I'm
Cross
confused.
purposes.
I feel like, I feel like we're encouraging parking as we need as much as we can because we have this deficit. We still have to find some, we don't know where it is. But yet, let's encourage economic development by saying, you don't have to put in as much parking. I'm a little confused by
And
that.
part of it is, right now, through the moratorium, council's asked us to look at parking in Central. And so we have someone looking that helped with the right size parking program in Seattle that has all sorts of scenarios, and they've done tests, and it's rather extensive. But we're hoping to take that information to see, did we do the right standards for Central? Did we do the right minimum and maximum? And if we can use those anywhere else, because they've made sense, because we're having somebody test them, we're saying consider them in Old Town to see if that would help us with the parking issues by maybe sharing more, having more public parking, figuring it all out. We're not saying just absolutely do it. We're saying see what we've learned from Central and see if we can use it for Old Town as well. Because we don't want to penalize Old Town and have them less desirable than to be in Central. So we're trying to just sort of even the playing field if it's possible. If it's not possible, you're right, we wouldn't do it. But we want to be able to look at it.
Okay, I appreciate that. That's what I was trying to figure out was these messages. I only have one more point, I think, and then I'm ready to say how I feel about this document, and that's EVB2, and that is specifically regarding.
I feel like a robot.
I'm still wrong. EVB2 is still on.
Sorry, I thought I'd be helpful for the pages, so let me actually find it. It's specifically regarding our Wi-Fi. So page 31 of 39, or page 41 of 49, EV policy B2. I was hoping that we could make this language stronger on the visual impact of communications network rather than just the develop strategies. I feel like that pushes it kind of down the line. So we're specifically addressing that this could be an issue, and so I felt like even just having language that says that blanketly telecoms need to, and the communications networks that will be coming into the future need to adhere, again, to those concepts of our community rather than this language of develop strategies. To me felt vague.
And one item that you missed at the last meeting is we're in a consortium right now with a lot of the East Side cities that are working with the small cell development because it's a new technology. And so we're all working together. It's not final yet what we've come up with, but we're all trying to figure out how to make sure that the city has a role in saying what it's going to look like when it comes into the town, whereas a lot of the small cell providers would like there to be less city say. And so we wanted to be really strong. In fact, I think it was John that said, we want to have it right in there that we want to be sure we're developing strategies that include concealment so that you don't see anything from our Old Town streets, because it is such a different area than where there's Cobra lighting or, the new kind of modern kinds of things. So that's why it's there, because the policies don't exist yet, but we're trying to pre-pump it that when it comes down, we want to be sure that we have the control of it when it comes down.
So I guess just this develop strategies such as concealment, I felt was left this loophole, maybe rather than saying develop strategies of concealment. But maybe what you're telling me is that it's so new that you still want to leave a little bit of gray area.
Right, but we wanted to mention concealments to show that we really like that idea. So that's why we wanted to put that in as a for example.
And the balance there is that we don't want to prohibit it from coming here because it's potentially very beneficial.
Right.
And we don't want to go that extensive, but we certainly do care about it, right? And we don't want to let them just come in and have free reign of our streets. So
right.
On that point, I would this is just a nitpicky thing, which you can change if you want, but I would probably just say make investments in downtown internet connectivity and cell service, because Wi-Fi is probably going to be gone in a couple of years. Based on 20 years ago, we were all listening to our dial-up modems and wondering, never heard of Wi-Fi.
So
the
just,
Wi-Fi term could date.
So just downtown cell service?
No, I would just say internet connectivity and cell service.
Yeah,
Oh.
I agree.
I think it's good.
I'm going to
Just
write on that.
5G or whatever.
Makes everything, puts everything to that rail.
but it's Old Town. You don't want Wi-Fi? Come on.
Go back to dial-up. We want dial-up.
Dial-up, too.
Where's the tradition? Come on, people.
We can
wanna be
pipe in the
consistent.
sound.
Remember those days?
Exactly.
I just have,
People
Joy,
just
were you
started
gonna-
turning
No,
off their
yeah.
TVs, too.
I just have one comment and one question, and then I'm good. The first, I guess, question is on connectivity and mobility. We haven't really talked about that much yet, but on the C&M policy A1, which is on page 22 of 39, we talk about sidewalks and how we connect sidewalks and all that
the
stuff.
other 22?
Is accessibility, Mary's gone now, but she was talking about, kind of ADA
Chairs.
compliance and chairs and stuff. Is that inherent? I mean, I don't know much about the state and federal laws around that. Is that sort of already baked into this, or do we need to say?
Well, ADA requires certain rules in regards to putting
Right.
sidewalks and stuff in that would accommodate motorized chairs.
Yeah.
Right, so if the question is, so I guess to say it the opposite of that, you wouldn't be able to construct sidewalks that weren't
But
accessible.
we're not, okay. That's,
So I think, in that sense, I think
We're covered.
it's inside of this.
yeah, okay. I thought so, I just was curious. And then the only other comment I have is on environmental goal, under environmental goal B, page 27 of 39. If you go down to E policy B3, which is acquire creekside parcels to enhance and restore Issaquah's creek and reduce flooding impacts, I think that's actually covered up above under E policy A4. So we already talk about including property acquisition for flood control. I think you probably mentioned it again under goal B because that's where we're talking about enhancing riparian areas and wetlands and stuff. But anyway, there might just be some repetition there.
And where is the other place, did you say?
Right here, A4.
Oh,
A4.
A4
oh,
and
I'm
B3.
sorry.
So you might
Totally
just,
brain dead.
you might just be able to delete the second one. And then this is another thing that I'm not sure if it needs to be stated or not, but there's a couple of places in here where we talk about acquiring creekside parcels, and I understand why. Do we need to say acquire creekside parcels from willing sellers to enhance? Or, again, is that implied, or might there be a situation where the city, for flood control
Oh,
purposes?
for like eminent domain or something
Yeah.
like that? We
I
haven't-
assume
it's
not,
They're
but-
usually, or I mean, they're willing
Willing
sellers
sellers,
when we,
yeah.
yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know if people are sensitive to that, but they might
Right.
be. So.
Acquire when available.
Acquire when available, yeah.
Yikes.
That's all I have.
Good.
So I've got three. One of them is I would like to send a recommendation to city council that they decide what to do with Old Town in terms of spelling.
Well, I think we should make a recommendation of what they will decide, and that's what they do.
That's
So we
part of
make-
the amendments.
Yeah.
That's part of the amendments, so that would be part of your recommendation.
Okay. So that's all, we are already.
You're
that-
covered.
I'm covered, okay, all right. And I propose that we keep Old Town, northern section that they want to remove, part of the existing Old Town, and that part of this plan also includes a gateway for the southern portion of Old Town.
As a recommendation of the city council.
I do have one last question, I promise. Yeah.
You had a third one, you said.
That was, yeah, north
Boundary
and,
gateway.
yeah, the north and south was two.
Oh,
So-
okay.
Oh, no. Oh, and north.
A gateway for the north, a gateway for the south as recommendations
south.
to city council.
To keep them, and the E.
I had a question actually, which is about, we talk about water in this document, but that didn't really come up much. And, it's not actually in Old Town, but the plume of toxic chemicals that we had an issue with wells is kind of adjacent and kind of hovers up kind of to the side of it. And I think that what really struck me was this concept of us wanting to upgrade old homes, wanting to be able to keep this inventory and stock of affordable housing. And my question was specifically regarding the pipes. Do we have any kind of policy in place as a city to address our older community to be able to ensure kind of clean drinking water when we know that we have some issues with our wells, when we have this giant plume sitting just next to Old Town?
We actually have a water comprehensive plan and a sewer comprehensive plan that we have to update every 5 years. It's a state regulation. And there's a listing of all the pipes that are needing to be updated, or culverts, or whatever infrastructure needs to be updated. But I think those are on 5-year schedules, aren't they, Kurt?
Okay.
And so that would be covered in the big plan.
And there's kind of this acknowledgement that these
Right.
older areas need
That
to
you
kind of
have to
have that
keep going, or-
consideration.
yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Again, I don't think that needs to be included in the document, but we didn't ever touch on it, so I wanted to
Right,
kind of.
and that's why, because it's the big picture, but good
Yeah.
question.
Thank
Good
you.
question.
Well, to help wind our discussion, I'm ready to vote on this as amended in the comments that we've made. But I would be, again, in favor of keeping the E for Old Town, as well as not allowing the restriction of the boundary. So if I,
Are you ready to vote on this package, or do you want to discuss holding it off some more?
I think we need to go back and rebake it, but I don't think it's ready. So, yes, we can vote.
We can vote, and if you don't think it's ready, you can.
Or you can make a motion to not, or
I
you
would
can
like
do
to
it
make a
many different
motion
ways.
that we continue the discussion on this agenda, on this plan, Old Town Plan.
Is there a second?
Hearing no
Hearing none?
second?
I was just
Motion.
prompting you. Sorry, I was just prompting you. Hearing none?
No, I'm just
No,
waiting.
you're there, I know,
Hearing
I know.
no second, and the motion is not
Jerry
put
was
forward to the
yelling at me
commission.
right now.
In that case, any other discussion?
yeah, I would like to make a motion, chair, to the chair, that
Sure how they're gonna do it.
we continue with number 1 of updating the elements regarding the Old Town community connectivity, mobility, environment, and economic vitality, and adding a housing element. But I would leave off the second. Proposed boundary change, I would not recommend part of this document.
Okay.
Is that a motion?
Is that the motion?
Yeah, that's my motion is to,
Okay.
is to vote on the, to bring a vote on the first part and to specifically
You don't-
strike
you
the
don't-
second.
Well, let me ask a discussion, because it seems to me what we could do, well, would be, we can vote on the boundary and say yes or no.
Yeah, okay.
Keep it all together.
Yeah, but there's no reason not to conclude this if we're going to vote on this.
Okay.
So it would be that we're approving the updated elements as modified by our discussion tonight, and we also we are not proposing that the Old Town sub-area be changed.
That's exactly what I would like to, that is exactly what I would propose. I
Susan
don't know that I
typing
have backing
furiously.
for that, but
So you're asking 2 votes.
No, it's one vote, because this whole thing is a matter of, if you look on the back on your thing, it's talking about the voting on a proposed finding of fact amendments, review, and a recommendation that the updated elements of Old Town community connectivity, mobility, environment, economic vitality, housing element be approved
as we've discussed.
as we have amended,
Yep.
or as amended, with regards to
The comments that we put
limits,
to
the
staff.
comments and stuff that you have, and that we are not recommending approval of the boundary change. And I guess we can also add in there that we're also recommending that old stay.
That's the clarification I was going to ask for, is to the E or no E.
Yeah, old stays old with an E.
I don't feel 100% comfortable with voting about the proposed boundary changes because I don't know that it's been fully defined what happens if it's removed or if it stays in. And I don't know if that happened at a session that I missed or if it happened before I joined this effort, but
No.
it just seems like something that we talked a lot about. And then now we're saying either yes or no as a recommendation without really getting full-on answers to our questions about what that area becomes if it is voted out of Old Town, I guess that's my concern. And if everyone else wanted to vote tonight, I mean, I don't know if I feel comfortable saying yay or nay.
That's okay.
This is what I'm saying. I don't know if anyone else shares that or if I'm missing something.
So I guess to clarify, so then in that case, we would split the issues. We would vote on the amendment and not.
Just saying, splitting it till we discuss whether it should be
Personally, yeah, I feel like we
moved or remain the same to a later meeting.
I'd be happy to vote on the rest of the plan, but that boundary, I feel like we didn't get a full enough understanding of that to vote on that tonight.
So that was how I originally was
Okay,
was
we can make
proposing.
we can have two votes then, basically.
As long as, I mean, I don't know if that,
No,
what
that's
that
good.
means to the process, but.
You want to make a motion that we split them?
Well, let's find out, is there a time crunch? Is there a specific reason why we need to have this packet voted on tonight?
It's part of all of the projects that are, you saw your schedule on the back of the, it's part of trying to get all the pieces through the Planning Policy Commission so they can get through the council on their timeline. If you're not ready, you're not ready, but then we wouldn't look at it until June. And I'm not sure what we would be able to tell you about this specific boundary change, because if it's out of the boundary, the zoning doesn't change, nothing would change until, if we were going to change the zoning or propose the zoning, it would have to come back to you guys again, because you guys are in charge of that. So it would just be the first step that was in the docket of the task force recommendation that maybe Old Town really starts at the creek, and so that should be part of Central. But it would have just been the first step. Nothing changes immediately, other than then we would start talking about, does the zoning change? Does it, what would happen next? Should it be, but it was just the first step. And if we would have realized that you guys had issues with it, I never realized that there was an issue, because it's been in the docket all this time, that to have the folks coming, to have someone from the task force come and tell us why that was important to them.
The other aspect, of course, is again, that we're making a recommendation to the city council.
And if we don't fully bake this, they're going to kick it back to us, which means it's going to take even more time.
No, they won't.
They'll make a decision.
They'll make a decision.
They appreciate our guidance, but they will move forward. So we can recommend what we think, but it's not in our purview.
In further clarification, it's going to working session first and then to council. Is that what you said?
Correct.
Yeah,
Right.
so they'll work on it a little bit, yeah.
Right. They're going to have a lot of looks at it.
So at least in my view of the discussion we've had tonight, the consensus that we should not remove.
Yeah.
The city council may say otherwise, but we can go ahead and make the recommendation that it stays the same. And if they choose otherwise, they can follow what the recommendation was by the.
Right.
And here's the concern, though. If we say you want it to remain, then shouldn't there be a gateway vision for that area,
We've already said we want one in the north end and the south end.
Right.
right? But shouldn't we evaluate that as part of this? Or would that be an amendment to this? Because right now, there isn't a policy for gateway, because they didn't create one, because it was going away.
I think staff knows that we want to include, that we want to encompass a feeling that we want to have gateways. We want everyone to recognize when they're coming in, just as we had a friendly comment of saying how we want people to know where they are and how to behave, and this is Old Town. So
Right. And
we
depending
want
on-
to acknowledge all gateways,
Right.
so wherever they rest, wherever.
And depending on where your vote goes on where the boundary stays, talk about the gateway would either be a Dogwood or a Gilman.
Right.
So,
So this is a question for staff. If we vote on this tonight and we decide that we're going to go ahead and that we want gateways for the north and the south, and we approve this, what would be the next step for the vision, the planning policy for those gateways?
Well, when we do the code, you could have gateway, right now, the design standards have gateway features in them, and it's like the corners of the buildings have plazas, or there's a signage, we would have that when we update the code next year. We would put maybe more specifics in about the west one should have these aspects, the north one should have you know, if you want to get into specifics or something like that, that would be the time for the teeth, for,
But if that's a recommendation too, because we don't talk about gateways in here now.
Right.
We would
just
put
talked about the
a
south.
policy about gateways and
So
say,
we-
provide standards for north and south gateways in Old Town before it goes to city council.
Okay.
Right,
And
'cause
then
now
that
we
would
just
come
do
back to
something.
us. So you're looking at two different projects then?
Just go to council.
Right. She was talking about the design standards, and I'm talking about the policies that go to council on the 8th.
Right, so my question is, would there be two different policies then? One for gateways and then one for the rest of everything else we discussed tonight? 'Cause you would have to amend this then, right? Because
well, we're
those
going to amend
We're
a
gonna amend it
lot
anyway.
from
There
what
are
you
lots of
guys talked
comments.
about.
Yeah, we've talked about a
We
lot
have
of things.
pages of stuff we're going to put
Yeah,
in.
staff's going to sharpen language. We've given them awesome feedback about this document, probably more than they anticipated. And
Right.
so it's just an inclusion of saying we want gateways into the community to be, help
Right.
define that character.
I understand you're going to go back and sharpen your pencils on this thing with all of our suggestions, but my question is, would gateways, because right now this packet does not talk about a
includes-
north gateway.
Right, it
Right.
includes
south
this,
gateway.
it includes the one from Sunset. We would add a mention of the other gateways in a policy.
Right, and so those gateways, that policy would then come back to us?
No.
No,
It would just be
It would go right to
incorporated here
council.
and forwarded to, you would trust us that it would get done, and we would forward it on to council with that policy in here.
Okay.
Just like
okay.
everything else. Yeah.
That's the part that I didn't know how,
Okay.
logistically, how that works, so
Okay,
appreciate that.
sure.
I'd no longer like to make a motion to separate the votes. I feel like I'm ready to
Oh, John, I love you. This is so fun. I mean, no, really, it's
Is
fun.
there any more discussion? Do we have the motion to accept and?
Yeah, still on the table, right?
I'm not even sure where we are, but a motion to accept one and to propose that the boundaries not be changed, subject to the additions that we've already added to the document.
So I would second that
And
motion.
there's a second.
Okay.
Any more discussion?
Thanks for the discussion in between the motion and
Right,
the second.
that helped me too. So it's approve.
The poor
everything.
secretary's got to try to put this in the notes.
That's all here for Susan, man.
And so it's no boundary change, but everything, but all the elements.
As amended, yep.
Yes.
Okay.
And
but
keep
it-
the
And
E.
keeping the,
Okay, I was gonna say
and
there's-
keeping the E.
Keeping the E in old.
Okay, I just wanted to
Yep.
clarify, okay.
It's been motioned and seconded.
Motion seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Well, the gateways are one of the
Opposed?
1,000
Aye.
things we have to do.
Motion passes.
Was that unanimous? I
No.
missed, I
No.
was looking this way.
4-1.
I'm sorry.
I voted no because I don't think it's ready yet.
Okay, I just looked this way, so I didn't see the mouths, so that's why I didn't know who said what. Okay.
4-1.
Super.
That being said, is there any other things that we have to discuss?
Not that I know of. Does anyone with brain cells
There is
know?
we have the
Anything
meeting
else?
on the 11th, is the next
Yes.
meeting,
Yes,
at 5
5
o'clock.
5 o'clock.
Some of us
PM.
may not be able to make that because of
Okay, I
comment.
understand. But it was,
Everybody's aware of that, and that'll be the first, is that the first meeting
the
with the
very
new
first
members?
meeting with our new members,
Our new member,
one of which may be sitting in the front row, allegedly.
Lindsay Walsh,
Lindsay,
is the
we're
new
happy to have you
full-time
amongst
member.
us.
And then we have 3 alternates, correct?
Yes,
So we're going to have
Full house.
Full deck, yeah.
one,
we'll have to bring
yeah,
all
we're going
the
to get another
chairs up.
chair. Well,
Yes,
we're going to
very
have too
exciting.
many people, have 2 more chairs.
No, not
Joan
too
will be
many,
back.
never too many.
Never
This
too
is-
many?
Never. I don't think there's ever too many.
Thank
See
you, thank
everybody
you.
the 11th, hopefully.
Yes.
In that case, I will adjourn the meeting at 9:25. Thank you very much. And thank you
Well
to the members of the
done. Well
public
done.
for making your comments and sitting around listening to us debate endlessly.
Well done, so keep
Not
the E,
endlessly,
keep
because
the
we ended,
border.
so.